should be broadcasting now.
We are broadcasting now? Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of the 17th of June. I am your chair, Louis Stark, and I will be actually running this meeting in terms of the 3 hours that we plan to actually hold it. As usual, the council is live streaming this, although we are in committee room 2. So for those of you looking in, I do apologise if the camera angles are not quite what they should be, but we are in a slightly different and smaller committee room today. Once that live streaming is complete, we will then upload that to the website so that can be viewed by others who are unable to see the live stream. The papers for this meeting are in the agenda part, which has also been published on the Herefordshire website. So anyone looking in can actually access those papers through the agenda that's on the website. The acoustics in this room might not be brilliant because the microphones are built into the room rather than being in front of us today, everyone. So can I ask that we speak as loudly as possible, that we switch our mobiles to silent, and we keep our devices like laptops on silent as well, thank you. Otherwise, those looking in will not be able to actually hear us today. Hi, Dan, if you want to take a seat.
Just
Right. I'm going to introduce everyone around the room, but just before we start, I understand Rosanna Wilmot has joined us online. Rosanna, can you see and hear me?
I can, yes, thank you. Yes, I can hear and see you very well.
When you want to actually indicate that you want to actually say anything at the meeting, can you raise the virtual hand, please, so that we know that you do want to make a point? That's very useful, and welcome today. Those in the room, I will introduce for those people looking in. From the committee, we have Councillor Pemberdy, who's the Vice Chair, Councillor Mason, Councillor Highfield, Councillor Foxton, Councillor Owens, and last but not least, Councillor Thomas. And then from the Cabinet, we have 2 Cabinet members today for the price of 1. We have Councillor Swigglehurst, who is the Deputy Leader and the Lead on Environment, and we have Councillor Hurcombe, who is the Lead on Community Engagement and Resilience. Basically, Councillor Hurcombe, you're the community champion on the Cabinet, as I call it, yes, so that everyone understands that.
any dirty job that doesn't fit anybody else.
That's fine, okay. Thank you. Right, I'm now going to move on to the agenda itself. Clark, have we any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Philip Price.
And that's why Councillor Hurcombe is here today.
Yes.
Okay, fine. That's the only apology, yes?
Yes.
Right. So our name substitute is Councillor Hurcombe. Any declarations of interest today, members, on the agenda before us?
Sorry, Chair, not Councillor Price's name substitute. He was invited by mistake. He shouldn't have been invited. Most of the issues on the discussion today fall in my portfolio.
Well, so you're not a substitute then, sorry. I apologise for downgrading you, Councillor.
I wouldn't want Councillor Price to be recorded as absent when he would have been here otherwise.
You look pretty tall, but your heels are high. Is that what it is?
So Councillor Hurcombe is here in his own right. Okay, fine. Thank you.
That's it.
Item 4, the minutes. Are members happy with the minutes that were published on the agenda? Can you indicate by show of hands? I will sign these when you're ready, Simon, okay, after the meeting, as long as you make sure that they're before me and I don't forget. Item 5, are there any questions from members of the public?
No questions have been received.
Item 6, are there any questions from members of the council?
No.
So rapidly moving on, we come to item 7, which is our substantive topic today on land use management. Before I do that, I am going to introduce those who are non-members who are here today, officers. We have Steve Hodges and we have Shona Butter. And supporting me today, we have Daniel Webb, who's the Scrutiny Officer. We have Simon Carn, the Clerk. And they are going to help us with our scrutiny today. We have, as I said before, Rosanna Wilmot online. So thank you for attending today. Land use management. Thank you to officers for preparing the report. Members, I'm going to give 90 minutes max for our debate on this. And then we will have a short comfort break, after which we will come back and then discuss and agree any recommendations we will have. So I'll be planning roughly to bring the comfort break around 11:45, roughly, because I think one of the members wants to leave as well. Fine. What I want to start with is reminding you of the objectives for why we are doing land use management today. There are two objectives, although one of them is multi-layered, and I'll read them out because I always think it's worth reminding ourselves why we're here today. The first objective is to review the operation of current council policy on enabling and enforcing appropriate land management and use, including riparian responsibilities across the county. Part of that is to protect carriageways, ditches and verges, and to look at related enforcement issues, including planning breaches, to look at the impact of public rights of way. And on the other side of the fence, which is to do with sustainability, which is also one of our remits, we want to explore how the local authority can support adoption of sustainable farming methods. Now, before we start, I wouldn't mind having a dialogue with you, councillors, with us on why we are actually, as a committee, looking at land use management today. I think that's very important because people look at it might say, well, why this topic? I mean, I think you would agree that Hertfordshire has a special place in the Midlands as being the most rural county of all the authorities in the Midlands. I think that's right, isn't it, Councillor Wiggins? So from that perspective, land use itself is a significant part of everyday activity in this county as well. That's the reason why we as a committee really did want to look at what impact that might have in terms of certain aspects of council policy and also aspect of life across the council. So it's very important that that is actually borne in mind, because it's not something we've just plucked out there. And another issue around this is that land use itself is not done in isolation. I mean, it is connected to, obviously, the public realm, because obviously people who have land need access to the public realm. They need to be able to move themselves and their goods around the public realm, and that has issues for us as well. And it also has an impact in terms of our natural assets, rivers particularly. So I mean, it is in a way a connected system. And so when we're looking at land use management, inevitably, members, we're going to be wanting to see what that has in terms of an impact on the way that we manage our public realm assets and the way that we actually protect our natural assets. So the first question I want to ask, and it's quite an important question, do you feel, given that background and that context, that the council pays sufficient attention to what is happening on land use across the county? I mean, do you have access to, or do you maintain an inventory of land use? I mean, is there a map of the different mix of land use across the county and how it's changing? I mean, I know that's a multi-layered question, but it just seems to me that it's the proper standpoint. What does the council do in terms of monitoring what happens in terms of land use across the county?
That falls to the Environment Agency. So there are maps for land use that sit with the Environment Agency, but obviously because of the nature of farming, rotational change, that it's not consistent year to year. So you'll have one crop 1 year, different crop different year, according to what system that farmer's employing. But the EA does have a map of land use, so we do have a sense of the overall changes in terms of particularly change from pasture to arable. So whilst that might not tell you whether that arable is cereal or root crop or whatever it is, but it was grassland, now it is not, and vice versa. Although mainly recently the trend is increasing arable. We're seeing more arable.
I mean, so what I'm trying to get at, members, do come in at any time. We have a massive public realm asset in this county, massive. We've got over 2,000 miles of road. We've got more than 2,000 miles of public rights of way. We have green spaces. It's a massive asset, not even talking about our natural assets that we might want to actually come as well. Councillor Highfield.
Can I clarify here that there's two different areas? If you like, it's a little bit like our approach to net zero. We have got theoretically complete control over the things we own and are working towards. As far as the rest of the county is concerned, all we can do is influence. It's not ours.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies. We've got public realm assets which are ours. We are responsible legally for them, and we have to try and make that work as well as it can. As far as land use generally is concerned, we don't have control over that. As Councillor Swingler said, that's the Environment Agency keeps records. We can try and influence people to do the right thing, and I know Councillor Swingler does quite a lot of that by trying to encourage, you know, the right approach to things, but we don't have direct control. So they're two very different areas. How do we manage our own assets and how we influence everything else is very different.
I'm not denying that. I'll bring you in a minute. What I'm trying to get at is we have this massive asset and it is impacted by land use. And it may be that, as you say, we don't have direct influence over how people use the land. They own it, they have a right to use it whatever way that they want. But what I'm trying to get at is, what does the council do in terms of what it can do? Trying to actually monitor that and see what the impact might be downstream in terms of that change in land use around that asset. Because that can have major impacts when it comes to issues like
I still think, Mr. Chair, you're conflating the two areas. Perhaps Councillor.
Yeah, Councillor Pym, did you want?
Well, I only wanted to say that you're absolutely right, and we don't need to have control over how people manage their land until it impacts on our asset.
Yes.
So that's the point of this discussion, is about how can we influence land use so that we can protect our assets. So we have control through enforcement and advisory groups, and you know that.
Yeah, and we do have power if their land use does cause some harm to our assets in some way and creates work for us. We have some power then. Yeah.
I'm just trying to set the scene for people looking in for ourselves, what the context is. We will funnel down into some of these issues, such as our limits in terms of our statutory responsibilities, what the involvement partner should be, funding, resources, you name it, even the economic conditions applied to land use and farming. But I do want to get that sort of context that although we don't influence land use, it does have a major impact on the way our assets operate. Councillor Hurcombe.
Yeah, so I think our ability to influence is quite high, but our ability to actually enforce is very, very low. We don't have the statutory powers to be able to tell a farmer they can't do X, Y, or Z on their land unless it directly affects the highway. And even then, take water coming onto the highway, our power is in relation to a premises, so physical property. It's not in relation to land. So we struggle there in terms of runoff and fields. And the EA certainly has powers. They sometimes choose to use or don't. The one area I draw your attention to is natural flood management, though, and that's more where we go out and we try and win hearts and minds. And that's where we're saying to a farmer, you can have both. You can have land that's farmed responsibly, that gives a yield and is a benefit to our flood strategy and its benefit to the public realm. I think, Steve, you'll probably have some examples we can use later on if you want.
Yes.
But that's certainly an area, and I know it quite well because one of the, I think it was 7 areas chosen when they're by the EA to fund a few years ago. One of those is in my area, and they produced a report after, I think it was 3 years of the project, where they'd gone and they changed how certain areas of land were farmed, and that had a direct impact on flooding downstream. So we do have some concrete examples we can share.
I mean, one of the areas that I'm interested in, I think we did share the draft recommendations with cabinet members, is around prevention here. I mean, I accept there are constraints. I accept that there's a limitation to what we might or might not be able to do. But we all know that prevention is better than actually having to react once the damage has been done. And what I'm trying to get at is, what can the council do in that area? I mean, there's issues around engagement, there's issues around enforcement and deterrence, there's issues around education. I'm just trying, through having that high level sort of context, to start funneling down, to start saying, right, if we don't have as you say, the sort of influence that we might have in other areas in terms of trying to ensure that the management of land use across the county is optimal to the way we want to run the assets, and the assets are there for them as well, not just for everyone else. What can we do? What do we do as a council in terms of trying to influence that, trying to minimise the risk of that impact from land use? I'd be interested to hear what you actually do to.
I think there are two aspects here. There's the work that probably kind of sits more with me, which is opening up dialogue, working collaboratively, doing things like the River Conference, identifying where there's a knowledge gap or something specific that needs to be done. So we've been working with farmers on farm gate nutrient balance to get the data more specific. That is, quite a stretch for a local authority to be dipping into that kind of area, but we see it's something that needs to be done, and it supports us in delivering the outcomes that we need to deliver for the river and nutrient neutrality. We've got things like the farm carbon audits, which we did, which have been very interesting. We're going to go back and do more work there, and that opens another door to those farmers. And some of those farmers we've also sponsored do one-to-one regenerative farming project, which we hope will kind of grow farmer to farmer as a peer-to-peer learning. So this is all kind of really how we exert a positive influence and support good practice and try to increase engagement and increase that level of regenerative and environmentally aware farming. Where we have probably a different type of approach would be if you have a field that is causing a specific issue in blocking, damaging our infrastructure, blocking drains or whatever. That's a different thing entirely. Probably not sitting with me, more sitting with Dan's team, that on what the approach needs to be there, because obviously that's where you're going to talk with the Environment Agency, because farming rules for water is going to come into play there. But also, what do we do about ongoing costs to the public purse as a result of a specific issue? So it's not a general issue, it's a locational specific, one field, one place, one drain, and they probably have to be dealt with on a...
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Rivers Conference, and members do come in, because I know the committee, or certainly those in our planning meeting, we're not really convinced about a parallel to the Rivers Conference being public realm conference, where you got people together to try and educate them as to what we need from them in terms of what we're trying to do with the public realm. They won't convince me that obviously the river's more romantic, but what I'm really trying to get at this prevention issue.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Rather than us sitting back and saying, right, there's all this land use going on, it's changing, some of it can be positive, some of it can be negative. I agree, we do a lot of engagement on the sustainable farming side. What about engagement on where the land use itself is having a harm on our assets, encroaching perhaps on a public right of way with the way it's been managed, or the way that the irrigation or the drainage is being applied, or the way that the soil is being treated, the way that all these things happen that then have a downstream impact on what we have to pick up.
If you want
as
to
a
talk
council.
about that, we've got a whole thing in here about enforcement.
Yeah,
Which is what this is
but
now.
I'm trying to see about engagement first, though, before enforcement.
And can I confirm, when you're talking about engagement, because we've talked a lot about public realm, and public realm obviously is what we own. It's about what is it, 1 or 2% of the county. A huge amount of the area is agriculture. So when you're talking about this at the moment, are you talking about predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly that land that is agricultural, and how we can influence those people who are farming or otherwise?
Well, I'm asking the question.
That's the area you're focusing on.
Question I'm asking.
Check. And that from our point of view, both what they do with that land and what they do with that land as it impacts our public realm.
Yeah.
Is that correct? I just want to check the line that you're taking.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. I mean, sorry, Councillor Pemberton.
So just to follow up what Louis was saying, we did have this conversation about how great the Rivers Conference is, and how it, it brings those kind of stakeholders together, and it is influencing them. And would that work for public realm? And we did decide that people perhaps wouldn't be that interested in public realm in the same way they were rivers. But we did talk about how the council might engage with other bodies that deal with land management, like the CLA, and we're doing some work like that in the local access forum, in that the Proud team are thinking about taking some of their kind of structures, styles and things like that to, is it the
NFU.
the NF, right, to kind of say, look, these are the kind of things we can support you with, these are the things that we would recommend. Yeah, so we did wonder if there was scope for looking at that kind of engagement.
I mean, we will touch upon enforcement later on, deterrence, and we will touch upon education. But I was very impressed with Rivers Conference. I mean, quite a few of us were there. And I accept that this isn't a great topic to try and get people engaged on it. But I just felt there is an issue around engagement with, say, the Environment Agency, with, as you say, the country and Land Business Association, and people who have an interest in this and what we're doing here.
The two principal points of engagement that we have is Farm Herefordshire, which is a partnership which includes a whole bunch of people, including the NFU and the CLA, and also the Herefordshire Rural Hub. So those, I think, are our two, and particularly the Rural Hub, really good conduits for communication out to the farming community. The Rural Hub probably more because they're directly going out to farmers, whereas Farm Herefordshire is a body of bodies, as it were, and then they will go out from there. If you see it.
Before I bring in Councillor,
If you want a recommendation or the beginnings of one, Councillor Swinglehurst has done an enormous amount of work in these engagements, doing the best she can. I don't think she gets quite enough support from ward councillors and other areas of the council. So I mean, she works hard, and some of the council officers that work with her on it work very hard on this. But I think if we're going to have an influence, we all need to be working on the same direction, and taking what opportunities we have to engage.
Yeah, and we do have that. So
it might be worth developing, because mainly the Rural Hub is looking at advising farmers about, how to put an application for payments, what to do about, if there's a change to regulation around spreading rules or whatever. So the business advice, they give an enormous amount of advice. I'm not aware that they have a particular line of advice running out over things like public rights of way. And so that might be a conversation that we should have with the Rural Hub thing. Would they be willing to work with us to deliver something around that? Because they are very willing to do specific advice work where, there's something that's not quite as it might be. They did a piece of work on working on watercourses within the Wye catchment, which is just trying to make it simpler and easier for farmers to understand all the rules and all the complications of when you want to do something, how do you do it? And it sort of takes them through a flow chart, and they could do, I'm sure, if we support them and help them, they would be able to do something similar on public rights of way.
I want to take this as a positive step forward. What I'm looking to is to build on the success that we've had in terms of the sustainable farming side and the Rivers Conference, where we have engaged very successfully. And I'm just seeing that there is an opportunity here, perhaps to parallel that, because our public realm asset is a hugely valuable asset. I mean, it costs us a fortune when things go wrong. I remember with the flooding in February 2020, we spent 10 million on structural damage across the county, and that was huge. Sorry, do you want to come, Councillor Hopkin will come in after, just Councillor.
The reason I asked a clarifying question earlier as to whether we're talking about land use or public realm is obviously they're connected. First of all, the point I made in our pre-meeting, which I think is relevant, public realm is a phrase that exists in this building. And as soon as it leaves this building, nobody's got a bloody clue what we're talking about. It's just an expensive thing that the council does. So the very first thing is, if we would have a conference, I think I said the other day, well, let's not have a public realm conference. Let's have a conference on Herefordshire's roads and byways or whatever it might be to talk about those things. That would be the equivalent of the Rivers Conference. I didn't do the most recent one. I didn't beat the previous. And the Rivers, to me, were very useful mechanisms to hang that level of multifaceted engagement off the rivers. You could therefore talk to hauliers and all the rest of it about what they want our road systems to do and how we manage the flooding over various areas, that might then give you leverage to be able to talk to landowners as to what's required if you focused it on what we call the public realm, but was actually to Tom, Dick and Harry out there, the roads. I think what I would be nervous about us doing is saying we're going to try and come up with yet another way of influencing farmers who frankly are really good at engaging with us at the moment because we give them reasons to engage. And I think we should be carrying on doing the good work that is being done because we need that goodwill, and it's all interconnected, to be able to do the enforcement while not disturbing the balance of the county. So I'm just a little bit nervous that we're really clear. Are we talking about what we ask our landowners and our farmers to do? Or are we talking about the roads and byways, etc.? Because you keep, forgive me, you keep talking about the public realm.
I think you need to separate, yeah. You need to be clear that there's influencing and obviously where it affects our public realm, and then there's how we manage our own public realm. And they are related, but they are two different topics.
Exactly.
Well, I don't think they are as unrelated as you say, because if you take the way that a piece of land is managed, and I've seen it, they might plough right up to the end. They might take the buffer zone away, like a tree or a row of trees or a row of hedges. They may not rotate the crops in a way that might allow the ground to actually hold the water, hold the soil. That, from what I've heard over my years as a councillor, there are ways that using the land can have a deleterious effect on our ability to actually manage our public realm.
I completely agree. Alyssa, could you come back on that? Because
I think Councillor Hudcombe wants to make a point.
I'm reminded of that Ronald Reagan quote, which is the scariest words in history are, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." It's very much the same with the council. When you turn up and talk to a landowner, there's a long process of building that trust and respect. And I know we have to enforce, and I am pro enforcement in certain circumstances, and that's why we've progressed a recent enforcement case that's been over the front page of the Hereford Times. But enforcement can have a negative effect on the relationship with landowners. If the body that turns up to talk to you and to try and promote a positive approach to managing your land is also the body that slaps you with a stick or fines you or does all of that, and it's got a reputation for doing so, when they turn up and say, could we have a look at this, you turn around and you say no. And that's what we're trying to find a balance that allows us to engage, allows us to promote a positive message, but also has repercussions for those who don't engage and don't follow that positive approach. And it is a tricky balance to strike, and we might not always get it right. And Councillor Highfield will certainly say we don't get it right at the moment.
We never slap them with a stick. That's my problem.
But there has to be that negotiation, and there has to be that trust built. And we are building a good relationship with the NFU at the moment. We've been invited, Alyssa and myself and the council, to a conference they're organising on water management, so to try and prevent droughts. Lots of farmers have experienced that. And it's about water extraction. So those that extract from boreholes and rivers and all of the rest of it, how do you manage that more responsibly? So that's an area where the council is leaning in. We don't have statutory powers or responsibilities, but we've been invited to the table because we forged those relationships. And that's really helpful. And it's a lot down to Alyssa and her team in terms of that. I think the other thing I would say, I've spent 2 years looking at the public realm in great detail for the new public realm contract. The easiest way to understand the public realm is it's any space in Herefordshire that has public rights attached to it. And that's what we're responsible for. If it doesn't have public rights attached to it, it isn't ours. And that's where the influence piece comes in. But you can talk all you want about street signs, trees and the rest of it, but anything that has public rights attached to it, that's ours. Anything that's a position.
Yeah.
Because we don't always own it, when we don't own the land that a footpath goes over, but we have some influence on how it's used. So,
well, let's turn to risk management now. I mean, I can see we're having a very interesting debate here. I'm clear in my mind where I'm coming from. We have a massive asset. You can describe it whatever way you want, Councillor Hudcombe. I don't mind. We can describe it in a better way, Councillor Mason, for people out there. It's 2,000 miles of roads. It's 2,100 miles of public rights of way. I don't know how much acreage it is in green space that we own. And we know, and we are aware as ward members, that from time to time, because of the way that land is used, we have problems on that network. It might not just be flooding, it could be encroachment, it could be blocking of a public right of way that we need then to re-establish access. what I'm trying to get at, there is a risk around managing all that. And that risk does come from us being an agricultural rural county, and the fact that we have so many rural roads and that they are surrounded by rurality, and that the way that that land is used around these rural roads has an impact on the way that we might be able to manage that asset.
So I'll give you an example.
And that's what I'm saying.
We had a village 2 years ago where the farmer had ploughed a field. There was a load of rainfall in 2024, and we ended up with about 80 to 100 tons of silt in straight in the main village. And that's because the ploughing had been done at the wrong time, a culvert blocked, and that resulted in that.
Yeah.
We didn't enforce in that scenario, but we did warn the landowner we would enforce again. And since then, we've been engaging with the landowner about how we rectify that problem permanently. So it speaks to your point. It's, you know, it is an example of where farming practices have resulted in damage and cost to the public realm.
Yeah, and I mean, I wanted to work in a collaborative way with the landowners. I mean, what I'm trying to look at is what can we do as a council on the preventive side more than we're doing at the moment. That's what I'm getting at, Councillor Hurcombe. And that's all I'm asking, which would mean engagement. Perhaps it would be engagement with certain bodies, as you say, Councillor Twiggus, would be better than engagement with other bodies. But it seems to me that preventive strategy, which includes engagement, which includes education as well, because as you said, Councillor Mason, what is the public realm to people out there? They don't know that, or what the impact might be of what they're doing. It seems to me that having that sort of preventive approach is absolutely clear. I don't want to say as clear as mud, because Councillor Fox and next and Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. Just in reference to what you're saying, what you've just mentioned as an illustration, I think I know what you're referring to, like a landslide that happened through ploughing going the wrong way, and there were certain houses with, you know, residents living there, and they suffered. Well, I know of one suffered dreadfully, and the lack of support, which was. I mean, it's very, very difficult when you've got your whole, it's not just, we're not talking about kitchen, you know, kitchen, yes, okay, for bad enough, but his whole garage was, and his garage was his vintage cars and all his bits and everything. It was horrendous, yes.
So I think in that scenario, so the scenario I'm talking about, the mud only ended up on the road going through the village. So what we did was we sent road sweepers out, we cleaned it up, you know, we did the public realm maintenance job.
Only through the village?
Only through the road. It didn't go into people's properties. And we were able to go and do all of the cleanup because it was entirely on our assets.
It's an easy task.
Yeah.
Because that happened in my ward during flooding, and I was absolutely dumbfounded as to how efficient the council was. Absolutely amazing. So I reinforced it.
And the other aspect you're talking about, where it's a property bordering onto a ploughed field, for instance, I know for a fact that Councillor Saunderhurst can talk with far more authority on this than I can, having lived through that experience herself. But there are legal measures that landowner can take, and the difficult balance that we have to strike, and Alyssa and I have had conversations about this, is how much support can we offer that landowner in pursuit of their adjacent neighbour when the council has no enforcement powers in that area.
I totally support and understand what you're saying, but I also had a point to make.
And that's what I'm talking about, prevention. And yes, the council may be great at clearing it up, but there's a cost to the taxpayer here, a massive cost to the taxpayer. And we've got to remember that we are here to actually represent our residents. And I do get residents saying, what do we get for the tax that we pay? So it's quite an important point. Councillor Thomas, you've been very patient. You wanted to come in.
Introduce a bit of reality.
You always do, Councillor Thomas.
From the farming point of view, I was at a very large agricultural event last night, a lot of big crowd, and one of the prizes was environmental. Some of the environmental projects, that event had the 10 biggest and best farmers in Herefordshire, by the way. But all of them are doing an awful lot for the environment. Farming is divided a little bit into two. You have farmers who earn a living from the land, and you have hobby farmers. There's an awful lot more of those got into Herefordshire in the last 10 years and things.
Okay.
Some of those are very bad farmers because they're not interested in the environment. They couldn't care a monkey's about it. It's their land. They've never been farming. They've never been landowners and such. They've obviously come into money and so they bought land. And I know in my ward alone, I've got 2 of those, and they are by far the worst farmers we've got because they don't look after anything. They don't look after their animals even properly, because one particular guy went on holiday for a month and left his workman to look after the animals. His workman had already handed his notes in, went. No, so the neighbouring farmers had to step in. Where we have got these not so good farmers, or even there are some good reasonable farmers. Enforcement. We were talking about mud. Just literally half a mile from my house, my cousin ploughed quite a steep hill. It rained very heavily, and God knows how many tons of soil went down. Luckily, it actually doesn't go down to anybody's houses, but the council had to come and clean it up. And I actually told him off because I said, look, we can't, you've got to be responsible. So what did he do? Go and get 2 big square bales and sit in his gateway so the mud can't get out. Should have done that when they finished ploughing it and planting it, but he didn't. So it all can be done, but where we have got, talking about rights of way, I know that you've got a couple of farmers that will not allow people on a public right of way. That is where we should take them to court straight away. Don't mess about if they don't let go. If you prosecute the bad one, all the good ones will say, haha, serve you right, because they're all abiding by the rules, and you get these bad ones not abiding by the rules. So if you go to a few meetings, they're egging them on, council on, to take these people to court. And I think enforcement has probably we see it a lot in what we do, planning enforcement, absolutely almost non-existent. And this is where we need to prosecute people that won't do it, won't allow farmers, public on the land. We all know, I knew every inch of my public footpaths on my farm. And before I finished farming, we had to either spray a line or cut a line across from one gateway or one stile to the other so people could walk without going through, like we used to grow maize, 7 foot tall. Who the hell's going to be able to get through that? So we have got to have, but we must divide up these farming, because and we do have a big influence on farming. It's what we buy. We all want, all of us have strawberries every season, so they're growing strawberries. We all want, like one last night, he grows 500 acres of asparagus. We all want asparagus. So if you want these exotic, what might be slightly exotic crops, farmers are going to grow them. So that does change. So
we are going to touch upon enforcement, and we are going to touch upon public rights of way, because I think there are specific issues that we've got in our objectives. But I'm going to bring in now Councillor Hurcombe, then Councillor Highfield, then Councillor Mason. I think he was ahead of you.
He might be. He's already gone.
I'll save comments on enforcement for when we have that debate. But I agree with you that our enforcement approach hasn't been good enough historically, and there are different enforcement teams as well, which I'll touch upon.
You want to leave that to
but the one point I did want to make is the distinction between farmers and landowners, which you've made helpfully. It is true, some of the drainage networks that this county has to use to drain the highway have been broken apart because big farms have been sold off or estates have been sold off, and they may have maintained them historically, which leads to a lot lost ditches. It leads to things not being maintained. The farmer who's got 6 acres, or the landowner who's got 6 acres, doesn't have a digger to clear out a ditch, so just doesn't bother. And they don't see, when they buy the field, they don't see the cost of maintaining the hedge, the ditch, and the drainage that goes across it, and then it's lost. And that's where the council has struggled, I think, over the last couple of decades.
Okay, Councillor Mason would like.
He's welcome to go first. Go ahead.
I don't want to be a chair that gets things wrong, you know. Councillor Mason.
A couple of pennies to drop for me. One, Dan, your point was very sensible about how we consider the public realm, because that of course does mean that things like drainage through private land, which are absolutely vital for us to understand, is something that we need to consider in that. And I think we probably just need to be careful when we're talking to the public that complex web is something that they might not fully understand. We should be more focused on bits that they understand. The penny dropped to me about what you were discussing and saying that you know that farming practices can be improved. And I think there probably is something on the back of all the work that Alyssa's done where we could say, are we still making progress? Have we still got levels of engagement? I know that when Steve was doing NFM works, there was a high level of engagement with some. There was very limited engagement with others. And you're like, well, okay, they're just not going to come to the party, because with NFM, you can't really get them there. But we were also limited, weren't we, as to where in the county we could go. And I think we're now in a place where we can go anywhere in the county with the NFM stuff. Is that right? And it'd be useful to see what level of engagement we've got on there. But the bit that really, the penny that really dropped for me was when you started talking about risk. And that's why I was struggling with the duties on landowners versus the public realm and the roads. If I think about the damage that's done to my roads, yes, flooding and issues like that become an issue. Yes, verges being pushed in and heavy vehicles damaging the road becomes an issue. Those aren't always agriculture related. And actually the biggest damage to my roads regularly is from the services industries, the BT Open, whatever they're called, Open Reach, all of those people who come and dig it up, essentially pre-ordering a whole load of potholes, because once they've dug in that trench, we know, sure as eggs is eggs, that there will be a whole load of potholes down there in a couple of years. So I think your point about understanding the risks on our public realm that we have to maintain is a really important question. And we should make sure that when we understand those risks, we don't just think about duties on landowners. We should also think about all those other people that, frankly, one way or another, damage our public realm. So it could be services, it could be electric cars, if you will listen to some people. It could be huge tractors rather than smaller tractors. There are all sorts of components.
Yes.
So in some cases, the farmers are our friends. In some cases, they might not be. But I think that's the point. There's a question about the risks to that. And then there's a question about engagement. Engagement's great. I don't see us looking at the full gamut of risks on our public realm.
So maybe that's a recommendation we need to consider as well. Before I come on to you, Councillor Highfield, and Councillor Pembroke comes in, do you want to say anything at this point, Steve?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Councillor Mason's right in terms of the natural flood management project we've got in Herefordshire. Yes, it's concentrated on 7 areas. And I guess the issue with natural flood management, as being touched on, we're there by invitation, really. We can showcase, and what we try to do is in terms of pulling together, what some of the options are, what some of the benefits are, because there's benefits to the farmer, the landowner, as well as to the public as well. So that's probably our biggest friend in terms of engagement is being able to point at what we've done elsewhere and why they should look to engage with us. Even within those 7 areas, it's actually taken further flood events for some to reach out to us and want to take part in the project. So down in the catchment, in US Harold, for example, there's been further people, coming forward, and we're actively working with them now. So yeah, there's been a lot of engagement within those 7 areas. Councillor Mason's right in terms of, we are looking at natural flood management in other areas, with the funding that we've got within the authority. So following on for the flooding in 2024, there's a number of areas across the county, where we are talking to landowners, trying to look at, what's possible. Again, pointing at, what we've done elsewhere. And I guess the point remains, though, that, sometimes that takes time. It's not a quick win. And, sometimes it may be NFM plus something else. There may need to be some built scheme, alongside, or some other kind of intervention. But natural flood management is definitely something that's in our toolkit, and that's definitely something that we're trying to roll out in other places as well.
Just before you come in, Councillor Highfield, and I'll bring you in, Councillor Pevely, as well. This is about the coherence I'm talking about in terms of preventive strategy. This is about, is the council doing enough coherently to ensure that the risk from land use, whether it's a risk that's caused by flooding or is risk caused by a farmer digging a ditch, which I know as chair here has caused flooding in Peterchurch, for example, or whether it's mud on the road, whether it's encroachment on a prow, whatever that risk is the council coherently looking at how it actually minimises that risk? And it can pick up best practice from what you're doing, Steve, in terms of NFM. It can pick up in terms of engagement, best practice, wherever that's happening, Councillor Hurcombe and Councillor Swinburne, whether it's through the people we engage on the environmental side or not, or whether it's through some other bodies that will be more engaged with us than others. That's the point I'm getting at. There is more that can be done here, because frankly, when I look at our public asset here, I'm frightened. I'm astonished. I mean, I just wait for the next resident to say not just a pothole, but there's a blockage and a prow, because I've got prows in my area as well, as everybody has, even though it's an urban area. We do have a network of public rights of way that go through, and there are always problems with them. And it's that issue of, is the council coherently trying to do what it can on prevention in order to minimise that risk? And it may be quite a difficult thing to achieve. I'm not saying it won't be, but I just feel that's one of the areas that I do think that we as a committee might want to make a recommendation on. But Councillor Highfield, you've been very patient. I think Councillor Pevely.
Chairman, just to clarify one thing, when the Second Rivers Conference was held in Monmouth, organised by the Friends of the Wye, and Alyssa and I were quite concerned because they literally threw it open to pretty much anybody, and we were a bit concerned that the campaigners and the landowners were going to end up like that. And to our very pleased surprise, it didn't work like that at all. They sided with each other against the Environment Agency, and the theme that came across, you'll agree with me on this, was give us a level playing field and we're fine with that. If there's regulations that we've got to follow, then make sure everybody follows them and we're happy. So it contradicts you a little bit, Councillor Hurcombe, in that you're saying you're a bit concerned about the ones who carry the stick are also trying to give them advice. But the fact is, I think Councillor Thomas summed it up rather well, that most of them are very happy to comply with what is required, as long as it's fair to everybody. Yes. And I think we've been guilty in letting a handful get away with it, because most farmers are great. They've got to earn a living. They're fighting to make enough money, and so they've got limitations what they can do. But most of them are very cooperative. And if they didn't understand something, and you pointed out, like I took a carload to go and see Townsend Farms, local farmers, and one who's been like third generation farmer, he literally was not aware that if you put your ploughs horizontally across the slope, it helps to stop the water coming down. He didn't know that. I was astonished that he didn't know it. And the other farmers with me were giving him a hard time over it. But he was very willing to be cooperative once he understood. So I think what we failed to do is create a level playing field. We have allowed some handful to get away with abuses that they shouldn't, and that costs us money, because we've ended up in the past, because we haven't taken enforcement action, we end up paying with taxpayers' money to fix problems that ought to have been fixed by the landowners.
And I think it'll be time soon, I think, to go on to enforcement, because we are.
I think you need to move on to
that more and more. And equity applies in terms of tax as well. I mean, people do not want to not comply. It's when they find others are not complying, and it's unfair.
Level playing field.
Councillor Pevely and then Councillor Thomas.
So going back to risk, and Dan identified a risk in that big farms get sold off, and there'll be a landowner that has just 6 acres and doesn't have a digger to clear a ditch. So I'm just wondering what we can do to support those landowners or to prevent that happening when when they're purchasing 6 acres, how are we informing them about their responsibilities with their land use to protect our assets? And since the chances are that the work is going to be done by the council anyway, because they won't be able to do it, is there a way of kind of building in some kind of covenant or condition into the purchase so that we maintain those ditches for those landowners who wouldn't be able to do it themselves?
So it does kind of dovetail onto enforcement, actually, helpfully, Chair, for you, but the short answer is no. There is no, we're not aware when people are selling property and land. So, and we equally, for a covenant to bind, you obviously need to have a stake in the purchase, in simple terms, and we don't have that. The reality is if they buy a piece of land that has a ditch running across it, they're still bound by their riparian duties, and we have the power to enforce that. There is a wider conversation to have, and we are having it as a cabinet and as a highways team, about how proportionate it is now. On a major A road, for instance, you've got a ditch running alongside it. In order to go and clean that ditch, you may need a permit, you may need to close the road, you may need traffic lights. How proportionate is it now to expect that landowner to be able to go and do that without the council supporting or doing it? And there'll be some on new roads, for instance, where actually it's really easy for the landowner. You know, you're just driving a digger down and clearing it, and they can have a conversation with a local farmer. I had this conversation, those of you who've been here a while may remember Mark Averill, and he gave me a brilliant example of where this has worked constructively in terms of tree work. They had a massive issue on a long road in a previous council he was responsible for. And instead of saying the council's going to pay for it, they actually knocked on every door and they said, you're responsible. We will arrange the contractor. This is how much you have to pay. If you don't choose to participate in this, you will have to make your own arrangements. And if you don't make your own arrangements, we will enforce. And I think that's a model that we should be looking at. It is actually, you know, we have the ability to arrange it at scale, but the individual might not. And I think that's probably more helpful to your point than trying to go down the legal route, because I don't necessarily think we've got any legal mechanism.
Yeah, I guess it was, yes, so that kind of makes sense. That seems like a way of doing that. It's just whether there's a way of making sure landowners know when they're taking on 6 acres with ditches on the, you know, on the public realm, whether there's a way of making them aware of their responsibility.
We have a really helpful diagram, which I've printed you all a copy of, that actually you pass those, you pass those around. It's really simple and it's really helpful in terms of who's responsible for what on a road. We publish this on our website. One thing we are guilty of on the website is there's lots of useful information, but we're really terrible at signposting people to it. And we are really awful at saying to the public, everything you possibly need to know about your rights and responsibilities is here, go and find it.
The search engine on the website is dreadful.
And as part of the review we've done with the public realm, you know, we've done phase 1, we've got the contract and we've introduced the contract. Phase 2 now is looking at all the documents that sat alongside it in terms of enforcement policies and things like that, that Alpha BT put together and are branded with Alpha BT. And that process is still ongoing. So the public realm, the new contract elements haven't finished. We've still got things to do. And part of that, and again, it comes back to this enforcement piece. Every single piece of highways enforcement starts with an inspector. Previously, the Prow inspectors have worked for Herefordshire Council. There's been 2 of them to cover 2,100 miles. So some routes only get inspected once every 3 years. And that's the standard that we've set for safety and risk. That to me isn't acceptable. So we've doubled the number of inspectors. There's now 4 instead of 2. Right. And we've made the investment there for a good reason. The locality stewards do the highway, the metal roads piece. And previously we've fell into the situation where they work with Alpha BT. They should be going to have the unofficial conversation with the landowner, the friendly knock on the door to say, a problem's been reported. This is what you can do. This is what you need to do. If you don't do this, I'm going to have to write formally to you. And then they should write the formal letter. Then they should write, I think it's a further letter after that. And then it should be referred to our enforcement officer. That is the piece of the process that has broken down. Because we quite often, it'll go to the locality steward. They might have the unofficial word. They might knock on the door, but then it dies a death and nothing happens. And we are aware of that. Now the locality stewards work for us. There's the ability for us to say, hold on a minute, that's not acceptable. You know, ward members, members of the public expect you to follow that process right through to its conclusion.
Could I add that it might have been helpful for this enforcement subject to have had somebody from our legal team here, because they have an attitude towards enforcement which is sometimes incompatible with what we're trying to achieve. But unfortunately, they're not here, but this is something we could take up.
There is one of the recommendations you may wish to consider. There's an overarching enforcement and prosecution policy for the council. And it may be a recommendation that that is reviewed
Yeah.
to update it.
We have got an enforcement recommendation, but it may need to be amended, I agree.
Because the last policy I could find when I was looking this up in preparation for this meeting, I think was last reviewed in 2019, and it was due a review a few years ago, and it wasn't.
Right. Well, if you want to go into charts, you can give us that draft recommendation for the committee to consider. Because we are here to actually help you to do what you want to do as a cabinet as well. That's one of the reasons why.
Make a very quick point as well. You mentioned some of the problems about Councillor Hercombe. The verges, it's not just a problem on the main roads. The landowners quite rightly say, wait a minute, it's your verge and it's these stupid drivers who keep driving it into the ditch. Why should I be responsible for clearing your verge out of my ditch? And that's a valid argument in some cases. So we have a problem, not just on main roads, but even on side roads where the landowners might rightly claim that they're not the cause of the problem. So why should they fix it?
And the drivers are. Councillor Thomas, you've been very patient.
Two things. When you buy land with an agricultural holding number, which anything over about an acre has to have, you get mountains of paperwork from MAF. That's what they used to be called. Telling you all your yes, I know. Changed God knows how many now. Like they changed this. And they tell you all your responsibilities. I used to get reams and reams of paper. So that is actually flooding. And you just brought up Lewis Harold. Well, I've lived in that area all my life. Lewis Harold flooded on a probably a 2 or 3 year cycle. No arable up, it's not farming fault, it's all grassland. There is a huge area when you go up towards Dewlis and up towards Muscoy. Problem there. About, I think 20, I would say 30 years ago, they cleaned out the Dewlis Brook from halfway down from Lewis Harold to Pontrilas. Flooding, it's never flooded since. Now the residents of Lewis Harold, I know it's not my ward, but it's just on the very edge of it. They've been on about getting this redredged for a long time. EA, no, won't have any thought, even though it was highly successful last time. There is about 400 yards of river that needs dredging. It's at the very bottom end of the River Dewlis, where it flows into the door a lot, so it's held back, so it deposits soil, it deposits stone into the river. A very simple, again, but EA, where do we go? You know, they just aren't helping. They're more interested in the environment of a few fish in the river and a few other things, rather than people say, yeah, you sold that probably cost £1 million in insurance, at least, probably more. Very bad damage. We haven't seen that for, say, 30 years, but if they dredge the river. So again, if we can influence EA, which I think is very difficult, but they aren't just, they're not, they don't have any responsibility to the people. You know, we all know about the gentleman farmer who dredged Kingsland. Well, Kingsland's never flooded since. You know, he was sent to prison. He should have been given a medal, really. And this
strongly disagree.
Well, you might disagree, but why should Kingsland be flooded? Because EA won't clean out the rivers.
As the ward councillor for that area, Kingsland may not have flooded, but just downstream did.
Well,
and equally, there are nuances to that case. I don't think he should have gone to prison either, but there are nuances. The dredging of the river wasn't the offence that resulted in the prison sentence. It was several connected factors. So just for the record.
Just stay with that point with the we have talked. I mean, I do want to go into enforcement because I do want to finish within the time that I've allotted. Councillor Swinton, I mean, I know we engage with the EA in terms of the Nutrient Management Board and on the environmental side. Do we engage with them in terms of these impacts on our public realm? I mean, just educating them about what.
That probably sits more with Steve, and I know Steve sits with, you know.
But that's the flooding side, I'm just.
But it's kind of something when we were talking about, for instance, soil coming off and blocking, then the enforcement there sits with the EA and the Farming Rules for Water to do all that is reasonable to prevent soil loss. So, you know, if a field has been, if the land's been managed in a way that there's high risk with a high risk crop and a high risk location, and as you said, that kind of that predictability of outcome, then really if that outcome occurs, then the EA should then go to that landowner and say, well, look, you know, that you didn't take a reasonable precaution against this choice of this crop on this field, and you know, in this time of year or whatever, you know, whatever the risk factors are. Now, whether or not we, and Steve will have to chime in here, but whether we have a conversation with the EA where we are aware that we're having to dig soil out of our drains, or we're having to you know, repeatedly undo that kind of impact, then the enforcement really sits with them.
Yeah, I think
to look at the prevention.
Before you come in, that's an important point. Enforcement is multifaceted here. That's the problem. It's not just about the council, it's about EA playing their part as well.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we can make a recommendation on it, I don't have to think about it. But Steve, come in.
Yeah. So in terms of that point then, so a little while ago, I got somebody in from the Environment Agency, from the Land and Water team. So our local, you know, contact within the Environment Agency, a guy called Dougal Ziegler. And what we did, we did a session with the locality stewards and with the drainage technicians, because, you know, in many cases they're out, you know, they're the first port of call for some of these issues. So what we did was, and it was a bit of me and a bit of Dougal, you know, talking with them. But I guess it was just really just reinforcing, you know, what needed to happen. So, you know, if there were reports of, you know, soil loss issues on the highway, these were the things that, you know, needed to happen. And I guess the same point applies to, you know, to flooding in general. The most important thing people can do is report it. So, you know, in terms of soil loss, it's reporting through to the Environment Agency. And then what the Environment Agency can do is then, you know, they mobilise, you know, in areas where there's, you know, multiple reports, and, you know, they've got officers that they can deploy, and they can, you know, look at some of these issues. But like I say, they don't know what they don't know. And like I say, with the locality stewards and the drainage technicians being that our eyes and ears, it's really important. But, you know, I agree, you know, that there's definitely things, you know, we can do around, you know, just banging the drum and making sure that people do report it, because that the Environment Agency, you know, need those reports to be able to, you know, to respond to, and also, I guess, make the case internally as well to make sure that they can respond appropriately as well. So there's some information I can share, you know, in terms of that, but it's just really reinforcing that report, the report it message.
And I think that's been really high profile, that campaign as well. So in terms of getting that message out to the public as well, I've seen it all over the place. So.
Yeah. Do we want to say something about that committee?
Can I do a quick one? Figures, when we had that Rivers conference, the director, chairman, president, whatever he is, of the head of the Environment Agency had to admit that in a whole year, all over the country, they had taken out 13 prosecutions total for the whole country. And everybody there was quite shocked at that ridiculously low number. And then they were asked to explain why. They said, we'd like to work with the landowners. Okay, and if they don't cooperate, well, then we work more with them. I mean, basically, they just weren't doing their job. So reporting to the Environment Agency, and I could give you some specific cases of horrific pollution events in the rivers that were reported to them. They didn't even register it as being reported. So we've got a problem with the response of the Environment Agency.
We have got 2 MPs. Is anyone talking to them about it? And this goes back to my initial point about the nature of this county and the nature of the risk we face in this county, which is much larger than other authorities in the Midlands, and it does have a bottom line cost to it. And that bottom line cost means you don't have that money to spend on something else, which could be enhancing services to residents.
I think as well, and it's a prudent time to mention it, that we've talked a lot about different ideas, but all of these come at a cost. And whether it's a cost in manpower, it's a cost in resource, it's a cost in investment. I mean, you may know the figure, but does anyone want to hazard a guess at how much revenue funding we spend on the public realm? So maintaining 2,000 miles of roads, 2,130,000 trees, all the signs, structures, bridges. Anyone?
You're talking about the 12 million that we allocate?
Lower.
£6.5 million we spend revenue funding. That's the entire revenue budget for highways. Yeah, and if there is one plea from me, and I would say this, having been through the process, that isn't adequate to do the level of things we would like to see done. And it has been adequate for some time.
But it's not adequate if we are not enforcing, because we're doing work that ought to be done by landowners, and that's costing us time and money.
There is a cost to enforcement too. Enforcement isn't free.
It's a deterrent.
You can recover the cost of enforcement, but in order to do the enforcement, go to court, deal with landowners who will appoint solicitors, they always do. That costs money that you may or may not recover at the end of the process.
Councillor Harkin, you make my point beautifully about focusing on prevention, about focusing on engagement, about focusing on education, about, as you said, Steve, focusing on reporting, getting our website better, Councillor Highfield, so that people do get access to the information they need to be able to actually comply with whatever they've got to comply. Councillor Previty.
Just on your point about enforcement, it's the same issue that we have with PROW, and you've talked about it. You have a policy, you've talked about what should be, what the process is, and that it then falls down. So I think most of us agree that the policies for enforcement are good and they're in place and they just need to be carried out.
Yeah.
It's the same conversation we have with.
So it's not a proud example, but the example that's on the front page of the Hereford Times, there are lots of people and the ward members here who may say to me, the team was, it's like, this was an issue in 2009. Well, it was first reported to us in 2024 when there was the series of flooding in that village. From then, from about a few months after that, Steve, I think it was, maybe 6 months after, we sent obviously a consultant out to do the evaluation of why the area flooded. We then tried to engage with that landowner. We tried to write to them at different addresses. The land wasn't registered, so it was even more complicated. We never got a response. So our final thing that we could do, having exhausted every other avenue of opportunity, was stick a notice to a gate. And at that point, the landowner chose to engage with us. And then that doesn't set the clock back, but it starts the conversation. We have to act proportionately. So instead of it being rectified in 28 days, we're now in conversations with the landowner and their lawyers about how we can move forwards. And everything, it's so frustrating for me as a ward member, and certainly me as a cabinet member, that's going to take, that this whole process from start to actually something happening, it's going to be 2 years.
Mm.
And in the meantime, if we have another heavy rainfall event, that area is still going to suffer.
As Councillor Harkin says, the ward member relevant is here. I am he. And in fact, that's the third attempt in that ward where we've been trying to enforce. And this comes back to the point about cost. The first two, nothing was happening. You sort of march all the troops up to the top of the hill, and at the very last minute, they eventually go, okay, all right, we'll do it. That doesn't get recorded as enforcement, but we've gone through a huge amount, and I was working with Steve on this. So the reason why the one was the front page of the newspaper was so important was because it was one where we were actually going to be able to have a story, was it Admiral Bing pour encourager les autres, to explain to others, we will take this seriously. The previous examples, I'm not going to go into the specifics of them, but we spent a huge amount of time, not just effort, but elapsed time trying to get it sorted. And just at the very last minute, because they suddenly decided we were for real, they went and did something that they could have done 8 months previously. That's the problem we face. And that's why I do think, and I mean, I've been working with Councillor Hercombe on this for a long time for exactly this reason. We need to be absolutely clear on where we will enforce, and that threat of enforcement has to be real, so that if people start to see that process going up, they go, do you know what, we know, we might as well act now.
Yeah.
Because actually, at some point, the council isn't just going to kowtow to us. That's been the risk. That people have thought, they'll just get bored of this and they'll move on.
So, Councillor Harkin, what needs to change to achieve that then?
What is already doing.
I mean,
And there's a number. There's no magic silver bullet on this. We've spent 2 years re-examining the public realm, looking at it, working out where it fails and where it works. and we brought the staff who control the budgets, the staff who control the work instructions. We brought those back in-house for a reason. Everyone sits together now that is a decision maker, and they work for Herefordshire Council, so they are subject to that scrutiny and they are subject to that influence of council officers. And my great hope, and I said this, I was actually mocked by Councillor Harvey for, I think, but I said overnight you shouldn't notice a difference. Consistency was what we were after in terms of maintenance, but gradually we're after that building better responses, more effective enforcement, more effective investment. I mean, there's you spoke about actually preventing stuff rather than reacting to stuff. There's a really interesting stat that may have been lost because it was published to DFT in return for extra funding. In 23-24, only 1.9% of our entire highways budget was spent on preventative maintenance, 1.9%. And then the rest, the reactive maintenance was 21.4%, and the rest was just day-to-day tasks. That is now projected this year to be 15.7% on preventative maintenance and 13.8% on reactive. So the message has got through that actually we need to invest in the right places. And I've given the example already about hiring 2 more power inspectors. That will result in a level of work that comes forward because we should be inspecting more frequently. We should be getting it right. I have, and Shona will tell you, every time something comes in my inbox that's power related, it gets pinged on to Shona for a response or a request for things to be actioned. I shouldn't have to do that as the cabinet member. The system should work behind that. And if the system fails, that's when you get contacted as a cabinet member for someone to say, hold on a minute, this isn't right. My dream is I get less emails. It's everyone's dream. But if I get less emails, it means the system is working. And they have now, and apart from increasing the overall revenue budget to allow more tasks to be done, they have all the tools they need to be able to do the job that we want them to do. Yes, there are some policies that perhaps need to be streamlined and reviewed, but I'm confident that over the next 6 to 12 months that we will see a change. And one of those big changes for Proud certainly is we've got a subject matter expert now. I mean, how many years did you work for Shropshire, Shona?
34.
So 34 years of experience on Proud, leading a team now. I think you'd probably say there were significant challenges when you arrived in terms of the structure, in terms of the policies, and it's an area we haven't managed well when it transitioned back from Balfour Beatty. So long story short, we have the tools. We are switching the priority of investment, so it's proactive, not reactive. More money, more revenue funding will enable us to do some more of these tasks. And equally, one of the things Alyssa and I have talked about relatively frequently actually is one enforcement team in the council, not multiple different layers of enforcement in different places. There are a suite of legal powers available to us under a whole host of legislation. And if you had one inspector going out who could identify all of the issues on that site, then we could do far more effective enforcement. But at the moment, if you've got a planning case, it goes to planning. If you've got Prow, it goes to Prow. If you've got drainage, it goes to Steve's team. It just doesn't, it's siloed and it's not effective. So one enforcement.
And just I was talking about coherence in terms of prevention, we're now talking about coherence in terms of enforcement. So the two go hand in hand. Because when the prevention doesn't work, as you said, Councillor Mason, and you, Councillor Highfield, you've got to have that fist that says, right, it hasn't worked. We've got to then
Councillor Mason said, if they know that eventually we will take forceful action, even though it may be slow, then that's a deterrent. They will behave a bit earlier than they currently have. But I would like to differentiate between neglect or mistake in land management and willful problems. And there are a handful of cases where it's willful, and I think our enforcement approach should be different, where it's ignorance or a mistake or neglect, and where it's willful. So that's another thing on enforcement.
Can we make a recommendation that goes into that review of the policy?
Yes, I think
a very sensible thing to add to that.
Yes, I think we need to differentiate. I've just read through the enforcement the policy here that you kindly circulated, Dan, and I have read it in the past. It's the whole thing about why we shouldn't prosecute and why we should is very subjective, extremely subjective, and so I think it's too loose. We could be a little clearer on some. So when we review it, maybe we should try to make it a little bit. So if this, then that.
That's the overarching council policy. There is a separate public rights of way enforcement one, which you will have definitely read.
You're right.
And I'll circulate a copy of that if you would like as well. Enforcement on highways and enforcement on public rights of way is far clearer. An obstruction is an obstruction. The only time that it becomes an issue is when the route is disputed or the landowner has the honestly held belief that they didn't obstruct, and then they may have a defence that we've got to investigate, and that process takes time. It's not quite the same as planning where you've got to have that, is it expedient? Is it in the public interest? We don't have to have that test in highways enforcement. It is an absolute offence. Have you obstructed a highway? The answer is yes. We serve a notice. You either do it or we'll sort it.
That's what should happen. That's not happened in the past.
And that's the process that Shona's team are now looking at to make sure that we've got it right, because historically we clearly haven't.
Yeah, so on enforcement, we've got 3 strands. We've got coherence, which we've talked about. We've got proportionality in terms of when you apply it, because it depends on the nature of the fault by whoever it is that's doing the damage. And then we have the level playing field. So we've already got a recommendation on enforcement. So I think we just need to tweak that to get those 3 aspects in.
I think you need to review it quite comprehensively, actually.
Well, fair
I think so too, yes.
Well, we'll see if we need to review it.
Well, I just made the point that I think you've the recommendation as you drafted doesn't take into account the existing policy and the existing commitment to review that policy. So I think I'm not sure that it currently stands.
Okay, fine. Well, we can have a look at that.
Which should include blah 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 blah.
Yeah, we'll look at it in the break. But that's been very interesting. I do want to cover sustainable farming because that is one of our objectives. Can we now spend some time on ploughs, please? Because that is quite a thorny subject. I mean, it is the largest part of our public realm in terms of length. I mean, certainly, and it does lead to a lot of casework for ward members. And we were very interested in the statistic, weren't we, committee, when we saw there'd been about 2,500 reports, but only a handful of prosecutions.
Well, there's not actually been any court prosecutions, I believe, or no, one, is it, or none?
One notice served.
Yeah, we haven't actually done any prosecuting, and I think you gave the figures for 2 years, but I've looked and I don't think there's any figures for 5 years, let alone 2 years. So we basically, and it does seem difficult to believe that in a whole county, there has not been one case that's justified legal action.
So can I just explain some of the data, because the data is horrendous. Shona is not responsible for the data. She's only been in post 6 months.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yeah.
The data that came across from Balfour Beatty was awful. It has not been improved since. We have tried over the last 12 months to look at it. When we sat in the last local access forum meeting, there was it over 3,000 or over 2,500 active inquiries, which is ludicrous. There are some where you talk to the PFOs and parishes and they've gone and resolved them, and they resolved them 12 months ago and they're still open. So I wouldn't place too much reliance on that data. Obviously, going to court, we would have a record of that. So that I can absolutely stand behind that and say we haven't done that. But equally, some of these legal notices, you wouldn't necessarily go to court if the landowner.
No, of course not. Most people will cooperate once you send them a notice. I mean, that's a good thing. But there are a handful who won't.
But, I mean, looking at the plough network as a whole, and we do come across issues where basically the landowner's grabbed part of the plough and they'll put up a notice saying private land, keep out, and because people are not going to challenge that. So is the reporting mechanism in plough good enough, you think, in terms of us finding out? Because it's a huge network, 2,100 miles, of us finding out where the issues really are there.
And part of the work we've done with the new public realm contract and the reporting side of that is to allow people to be more precise with the location and to share what 3 words and things like that.
Right.
That's enormously helpful with Prow. If you're walking along a 10-kilometre path and someone's just said it's on this path roughly in this area and you've got a photo of a tree, you don't know where you're going, do you? Whereas what 3 words helps, and so we've added that layer in. We've also given PFOs and parishes the ability to download local lists, which is where we flag the data problem. So they can look in their specific area and go, oh, there's all of these problems. And if they want to, they can go back and check if they're still there, or if if the problem's worse, if it's upgrowth or overgrowth, for instance, it could have got worse. We're not as au fait as I'd like to be in terms of using that system. And I've got a couple of members of the local access forum who are trying to work with us to have a volunteer force that works with Herefordshire. So instead of that inspection every 3 years, you've got a local volunteer who's quite happy to go and walk it because they do, every month anyway, and they can feed back to us and give us that data. I think it's also worth clearing up because it's another area of confusion. We are responsible for bridges on public rights of way unless they have a private means of access across, where the arrangement may be slightly different. So it could be a 50% contribution. We're not responsible for gates or stiles. We're not often responsible for the other bits of furniture that have appeared as well. We are responsible for the signpost, though, aren't we? Our legal duty is to provide 25% of the replacement cost. So historically, we have provided the asset and the landowner's installed it, but that's our legal duty. So if a gate or stile needs replacing, it's 25% of the cost. One of the interesting debates that the Local Access Forum is having is how do we improve accessibility to the countryside for those mobility issues? Our biggest problem is we are bound by the Equality Act and we have to consider equality in everything we do. The private landowners aren't. And so if a landowner wants to replace a stile with a stile, they replace a stile with a stile. And we can have the conversation as much as we want about trying to persuade them to do something different, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And I had an issue recently where I saw exactly how effective different styles of inspection could be. I'd had a footpath officer in one of my parishes who had been trying to get something done for 2 years. There was a new person who came in, completely different approach, phoned the landowner up on day one, said, I'd like you to replace this. We'll have it done. He was invited around for a conversation. Landowner agreed after the law was spelled out to him and what he was responsible for, and the fact that he wouldn't have to pay for it and we provide the asset. You know, it took some time, but that was an entirely a Herefordshire Council driven process that had stopped action before and then caused action to happen. So I think there is a bit there about how we train our inspectors and we make sure that they're engaging with landowners and trying to have that conversation. So it goes back to your point earlier, you know, this is everyone's public realm. How do we make sure that we're bringing landowners with us on that journey?
And the public as well in this case, because the public often are the source of the reports that we get.
Small subcommittee that's working on access for disabled, for example, has made great progress. So that's good news on that.
Yes. And do you think we do use our enforcement powers enough here?
I've been quite clear with Shona and Lee. I don't think we do. We have one enforcement officer in Prowl, one enforcement officer covering 2,100 miles. We also don't have, we're not as robust as we could be in terms of the inspections, in terms of that follow-up process. So I'm not necessarily saying it's because they land on the enforcement officer's desk and they don't get done. I think somewhere in the process it could be breaks down slightly and they don't necessarily get to the enforcement officer. But Shona will be able to speak with more authority on that.
Shona, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I personally going to have to disagree with that comment because I did some research with other authorities to find out how many prosecutions and formal notices they've been serving over the last 5 years. And we are very comparable with those authorities. And I think that comes down to the fact that with rights of way, as has been said across the piece actually, it's very much about working with those landowners because we do not own the land. Mm-hmm. We have a statutory right of way that crosses their land, but we do not own the land effectively. So we have to negotiate quite strongly with landowners, not only for furniture replacement to get better access or easier access, but also to get them to understand what their legal responsibilities are and how we can assist, etc. So that negotiation is extremely successful, and that is how every local authority that I've ever worked for or I've been on committees with, that's how they do it, and that's how their policies work. I agree entirely that when we have a difficult landowner, let's put it that way, and they have had repeated contact and information, they should be taken to task.
I think that's where my comment in relation to not doing enough.
It's not as easy as it sounds though, and I have a specific example. It's not in Herefordshire because I haven't been here that long, but I have a specific example from Shropshire where I used to work for 34 years, where we had a bridge that got, it was a wooden 3-arch bridge that got washed out during flooding, or part of it did. There is a rumour that it didn't actually get as damaged as it should have done, but there was some assistance in some of that bridge being removed. And that was with a public bridleway, so it was allowed to be used by foot, horse and cycleway. And it was added after a legal process because it was only a footpath initially, but it was upgraded under the DMMO, Definitive Map Modification Order process. And all the time I worked at Shropshire, we tried to get this sorted out. So we're talking a long, long time. And we went to court. We served notice, we went to court, we had all the contractors there and everything. We got there and effectively the landowner of one of the landowners refused access. We had the police come. To cut a long story short, that bridge is still not in. We went to court, she was found guilty, she was fined, but
she appealed, which meant we had to then be going back to court again. And it would start all afresh, even though she'd been found guilty of that offence and actually driving at contractors on the ground, etc., etc. That cost the council an absolute fortune, and it's still not resolved. And we have all this legislation that should work and should function because it's quite clear what it stipulates. But that's why you have to be very careful before you decide to go down that formal enforcement route, because you also have to show that you have been reasonable in the beginning. So you might think we're wasting our time by negotiating, giving them a softer letter, then a more formal letter, etc. But that process is there for a reason, because if you go to the magistrate's court and the magistrate sees the council has just gone in straight away, they are likely to chuck it out. The other issue is 9 times out of 10, if you serve notice on the landowner after all that process, they will comply.
Yeah, agreed. The ones who, where it's mistake, neglect, didn't understand, then yes. There are some that willfully block these lanes, which, I mean, if they can make that lane or footpath no longer usable to the public, they've increased the value of their land substantially. We've got one in my ward where it's 50 metres from his house, a road. I mean, it's a boat. And of course, if he's been trying for 27 years now to make that permanently closed. And then what was our solution to this? We applied for a TRO to close it permanently and keep the man happy after 27 years of deliberate obstruction. I mean, that's the sort of problem we've had.
We consulted.
Yeah, we consulted, but that starts the process.
Shane, what you're saying is the power of the written word. Somebody can tell someone the things need doing. If you have it written, it's
Okay.
it's power.
That formal notice,
Definitely.
we were like that.
It is worrying for
Thomas
people.
said earlier that
Yeah.
there was a separate situation, but eventually that notice went up on site with the proper formal notice. That 9 times out of 10, that will be enough, thankfully, and that shows you how successful the team is, and particularly our first point of contact with inspectors. And now we have 4, because we only had 2 covering the whole of Herefordshire. We now have 4, so they resolve the vast majority of our issues just through that conversation and going to see them, building a rapport with their area, the parishes, etc., PFOs, the landowners in their areas.
They say it was 90%.
90%. I asked both my established inspectors separately how many issues they felt they resolved just through their initial involvement, and both of them separately said 90%.
It's almost about prevention, but it's not quite. Councillor Mason and Councillor Previty.
I'm going to be cheeky. I'm enjoying that rapport and report are very similar words, and I think those might be the 2 keys to this. Rapport is obviously how you solve it, but as you know, because you've got one very live case that I've sent to you, there are still instances where actually our processes fail. I think what I'm hearing at the moment is that the stuff that we report on, the stuff that has caught the eyes of members of the committee, is actually measuring the wrong stuff, and we all know what happens if you measure the wrong stuff. You end up with very perverse outcomes. So can I have a recommendation from here that you review the reporting that you do so that the reporting of activity sits correctly with the processes that you believe affect change correctly? In other words, if you know that the way to actually get this stuff done is to be utterly brutal on going through that process and, I'm very sorry, and make it very clear that there are steps that you will go through. Those steps will not be allowed to slip because of holidays and all the rest of it. You could then have a reporting process that says, yeah, we've set this in place. It will keep escalating, or the work will be done. And there's no slippage on that escalation. I got beaten up about this at the very first parish council summit. That's about 2 years ago, because the perception was Herefordshire Council just dropped stuff. And I think what we would like to see is a reporting framework that makes it very clear that once that negotiation has begun, people don't fall off it.
So just to expand on that, if you had stages of enforcement, which we do, and you had the data for each stage, then we could in a year's time come back here and say, hold on, we took 100 cases to stage 1, but they were resolved, and there's
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Because if you get to the place where you say, do you know what, there were 2,000 inquiries, every single one of them was resolved at stage 1 because they're absolutely terrified of us going through all the other stages, then do you know what, we've got a terribly efficient and well-functioning system.
I'd support that 100%. Plus, however, going back to our other recommendation, I think the current enforcement policy is incompatible with a step-by-step process like that. It needs reviewing.
what the public rights of way one or the overarching one.
The overarching one, yeah, which covers all of it. It's an enforcement policy.
Yes.
It's not the specific rights of way enforcement policy, it's the overall enforcement policy.
If the committee is going to look at the enforcement policies, can look at both, please.
Yes.
But what Councillor Highfield said, did we pick that up earlier?
Yes, I did.
Enforcement.
Yes.
They got it, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Peabody, the last word on enforcement, and I want to go into sustainable farming to finish our scrutiny tax.
So I think that's a good suggestion, and I think it's particularly would be really helpful that our PROW network is used by lots of people who are incredibly passionate about keeping PROW networks open, and they become activists, and there's all this kind of guerrilla warfare going on when they feel that things aren't progressing. So I think the benefit of trying to reassure them that steps are being taken, it would be really helpful too.
Okay, thank you. Sustainable farming, it's interesting to see that we are doing quite a lot of work on the net zero side, carbon audits, which is net zero. And we are also looking at manure analysis, and we have had, as you know, councillors from us, various conversations that pass through various other fora, including TNF studies, where the problem with the way manure is collected, stored, applied to the land has a massive, massive impact on what happens to the river if that actually leaches into it. The difficulty here again, and this is the thing we always come across, is it's the Environment Agency that has the primary responsibility here, is it, for a manure storage plan or whatever you call it? What can we do as a council to try and help where sustainable farming does have a benefit in terms of the impact on the river itself, including obviously things like trying to make the phosphate stay within the soil as well? I mean, what can we do more there rather than just concentrating on the net zero side to help the river in that respect?
Yeah, I think it is in that slightly grey area between where we end and the Environment Agency begins, and that so in terms of the regulation, it sits with the environment. They are the regulator, we're not the regulator. So mainly it sits with them, but we can lean in, we can do things like the River Conference. And in terms of things like manure, doing helping to support that work on manure analysis in order to bottom out the usefulness of RB209 in terms of understanding spreading rates, specific things that we're looking at, like the gypsum trials, which are really exciting, and could be a tremendous win for the catchment. So we kind of tend to pick up things where we feel that there's valuable work to be done, and where we can support farmers in doing that work and increasing understanding of any particular issue. And then things like farm carbon audits, again, that kind of shows that those traditional, what we tend to find, I think, is that traditional farming, that they are or can get to a carbon negative, which is to them business advantage, and we can help them with that understanding. And obviously what we hope is that will, what we're doing is almost like seed investment. We're putting things out there, and then we hope that we will get contagion, we'll get peer-to-peer learning, and you'll see more of it going on elsewhere because of what we've done to kind of start that process. But
the committee is going to look at the carbon management plan in November, which may bring out some of these issues. But the sense I was getting, and I don't want to be unfair here, because I'm very conscious of the excellent work that's done in terms of engagement with farmers in terms of sustainability. There is a confusion between what we're doing in terms to achieve net zero with them and a confusion about what we're trying to do, which might have a very positive and beneficial impact on reducing pollution levels in the river. Do you think that needs to be separated out? Do you think we need to?
It is, you'll find that these two things are one of those kind of classic Venn diagram thing. There's an awful lot of overlap between.
There is, you think
yeah,
so?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's difficult to separate them out, you think? Yes.
Yeah, and also it's not particularly, you know, why worry? You know, it does come.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to bring Rosanna in now. Rosanna wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. No, I was just really going to kind of reiterate some of what Councillor Swinghurst has said there, where the carbon footprinting project, while it might look specifically at carbon reduction, it does also tie into some of those practices that also reduce, for example, application of fertilisers or reduce tillage practices that also impact soil health and therefore also impacts kind of infiltration and the way nutrients travel to the water. So they are very much interlinked, and from a kind of farming business perspective, there are also those benefits to reduce cost and then obviously the impact then on the bottom line of the business that kind of can help to encourage the uptake of those practices. And I think it's interesting what you were talking about earlier in terms of how do we support or encourage practices that reduce the impact on the public realm and the assets that we're responsible for, that this really, you know, makes a part of that, in that some of those practices that you mentioned in terms of rotations or ploughing that can negatively impact or become a cost to the council when we're trying to kind of make reparations for the outcomes. Some of those encouragements are also around are kind of very relevant to this kind of sustainable farming conversation, and you know, a reduction in tillage or kind of improved rotations or cover crops, whatever it might be, that reduce the impact of agricultural practice on our assets, what is also better for the agricultural enterprise. I will just also touch on the way that we communicate that, and I think it's been touched on earlier in terms of where the best avenue for sharing the outcomes of these projects lie. There are already really well established kind of conduits for information that sit within the county for agriculture. You know, Herefordshire Rural Hub's been mentioned, Herefordshire Meadows, the NFU obviously, nature friendly farming. You know, there's a handful of organisations that farmers will go to for accessing advice and best practice. So one of the ways in which we can communicate the outcomes of our work is through those avenues, and also just to kind of emphasise that we have a role on the Wye Catchment Partnership and the Nutrient Management Board as well as kind of another conduit for that information to flow. But I think it really ties in really well to the earlier conversation around what is our role and how do we support or encourage that best practice. It is also about emphasising and advocating for the practices that the Herefordshire Rural Hub and similar organisations are working very hard on trying to encourage farmers to take up. One final point being that the challenge around engaging with the disengaged is something that is kind of across the board, across all of these organisations, and people that are working in this space to try and support agriculture to a more sustainable position. Trying to engage disengaged is incredibly hard, and yeah, something that's being, you know, attempted to being addressed across the board really.
Right, I mean, there are crossovers there. I can see that, and you said that, Councillor Swinhurst. And it's again about this coherence in terms of how the council's approaching all this and making the best of it, making the best of your initiatives in your area, so it lessens the impact of soil runoff on the roads, for example. I mean, is this all coming together somewhere? That's what I'm trying to get at in terms of within the council itself.
We touched on natural flood management earlier, and there's a temptation to see it just as leaky dams and ponds, and it's not. You know, it is about what crops you plant where, how you plant them, when you plough.
Right.
So that sustainable farming piece also comes into the natural flood management piece. And we have a natural flood management officer in Steve's team who is responsible for coordinating activity. I'm sure they coordinate with Rosanna as well. It does work. I think the problem is, as ward members, we don't necessarily see the sausage being made. We just see the policy announcement or the press release. And actually, there's a lot of work that goes on in the background with people coordinating in the right places.
And that could be on the website, that sort of message, that information. Because when someone who is a landowner looks at it and says, well, there's no benefit here for me, you can say, well, hold on a minute. You want to be able to have access through your unclassified road to the main highway network. Well, if you actually block that or damage it, you're not going to get the access. You won't be able to move your goods around, yourself around, or whatever.
I mean, I've got a landowner in my area who was enforced against by the council for altering a watercourse a number of years ago. And when we first went to talk to him about natural flood management, I went with the officer and it was the Wide Catchment Partnership, Seven Rivers. And I went with them to talk to the landowner, and the answer we got back was absolutely no chance. And then over subsequent months, we continued the engagement, we explained what was on offer, and now he's part of a natural flood management scheme that hopefully will prevent flooding in a village. It takes time, but you don't necessarily see it working, because what we're very conscious of with natural flood management is you may be talking to the landowner, but you can't tell the parish council or the ward councillor that you're necessarily who you're talking to and where, because they want it kept confidential. So you might report on the project when it's finished, but the ongoing negotiations, that happens in private with the council officers. And sometimes, you know, Steve's team will, if you ask, they'll say, okay, we're doing it in this broad area and these are the interventions we're looking at. But in terms of that, we're on this farm talking to this landowner, that stays confidential, and that's perhaps why you don't see it working.
So, and this is the final point, unless any members come in, because we're going to have to look at our recommendations. So are you reassuring us that when, for example, Rosanna talks about what they're doing in terms of initiatives of sustainable farming, particularly around soil retention, maybe around manure analysis and everything else, what Steve and his team are doing on flooding, what Shauna's team is doing on prouds, everything else, that is all coming together in some sort of risk strategy on the public realm? Or is that not quite, is that step not quite been
I think Steve
done yet?
Steve's probably,
As Councillor Highfield said, do we need a recommendation on risk here in order to bring that all together? That's what I'm thinking.
Steve's probably best placed to talk about the policy that underpins it. The thing that I would say is, again, it comes down to money. We've got the 2 million for flooding that we put in the capital programme, and we've recently approved 150,000 of that for natural flood management. Now, if Rosanna's team becomes aware that there's natural flood management money available, that may be a recommendation you make. And the more money we have available, the more times you can make that recommendation to farmers. But if we don't have the funds to start with, then you're in the policy sphere rather than the doing sphere. And there's...
Yeah, but it's that reassurance that you're using all those various initiatives to focus as much as possible in terms of mitigate the risk to our public realm, which is a hugely valuable asset.
And I've seen it work firsthand. I've seen it work well. Does that mean that there's a written policy that underpins it? No. Should there be? Probably. But what the teams have done is they've developed a working relationship that makes it work. And I suppose the risk there is if key personnel leave, then you don't have that follow-up and you don't have new people coming in. So yeah, perhaps it is a recommendation, you know, drawing these strands together in a risk strategy for natural flood management. I mean, we're the lead local flood authority, so we have to look at flood management anyway. But the risk to the public realm as a sort of preempting it. I mean, one thing we're very good at, so June 2025, Alpha BT sat down with us and said, this is the problem in the public realm. Now that problem was quantified in terms of money. So they told me there was 1,400 kilometres of road that needed resurfacing, and the backlog was over 100 million. They could tell me what the cash backlog was, but they hadn't looked at it as a wholesome approach to the public realm and said, actually, it's this backlog because we haven't invested in drainage, or because there's runoff from fields, or because there's ditches blocked, which I think is the piece we started the meeting.
Because we aren't engaging with farmers on land use. Councillor Swingerhurst, then I'll go
So I'm
to
just going to pick
Councillor
that up, I
Beverton.
think, and it goes somewhat to your, where you're coming from, which is saying there's got to be a point at which all this comes together, and there really isn't, because as Councillor Hercombe says, this is about networks of knowledge, that there is an almost infinitely complicated number of issues and players. And even if you were just looking at natural flood management, we're doing it. You've got the Wildlife Trust doing a bit, Wildlife Foundation are doing some. It's unbelievably complex, and the communication between all these bodies is not all that it might be. And sometimes I'll find out, that Wildlife are doing something just simply because we're meeting over a cup of tea, and it gets mentioned. I'm like, well, why didn't I know? So it is very, very complex. And in terms of water level management, we've got the our responsibility, you've got the IDB, we've got the Environment Agency have input there. You've got, and if it's in the SSSI, you've got to bring in Natural England. So is this all mapped somewhere? No, it isn't really. Is it in the heads of individuals who understand how all this joins up? Yes, it is, but it's but I'm not sure, because it's so constantly changing. It's such an incredibly dynamic area that it's very hard to capture it. Probably the closest would be coming something like the Catchment Partnership when they do their plan, which is for the river, but it will look at land use, which will consider infiltration because that affects flow. It will consider flooding because of flood. So that's probably the place where everything will finally start to swim into some sort of focus.
And that could be the cabinet response to our recommendation. But I still think there's something there to flag up as a committee, even if it just gets that debate going within the council. I said, well, what is possible here? And there may be some things that are possible, but it may not be a complete picture. Now I've got Councillor Pemberty, Councillor Mason, then Councillor Highfield, then Councillor Thomas, then I'm bringing it to an end. Right, Councillor Pemberty.
I was just going to say,
Steve,
just very quickly, I'm the group manager in the flood risk management team, but within the council, there's the drainage technicians. But I guess the key point is, and I echo what Councillor Swingerhurst and Councillor Hercombe have said. There's lots and lots of different strands here, but I guess the most important thing is, whoever picks the issue up, whether it's a locality steward, whether it's a drainage technician, whether it's one of my flood team, whether it's issues in the picked up through the climate change, we know each other, we network with each other. Is it documented? No, but yeah, we work really closely, and not just internally. There's lots of networks with external organisations as well, and yeah, I think it would be quite a challenge to pull that together, and it's something that would change really frequently, because as new opportunities come alive.
Denying that, but the fact that you put a recommendation down gets people thinking about, well, what is possible here, even if we can't do everything. But this is a huge risk to one of our most valuable assets. The way that land is used and everything else. It just seems to me a coherent approach to it. Wherever we can make a coherent approach to risk is obviously valuable. I'm going to stick with the order. I've got Councillor Williams, Councillor Pemberty, Councillor Mason, Councillor Highfield, Councillor Thomas, and then Councillor Swingerhurst. I'll give you the last word. Okay, Councillor Pemberty.
Yes, I've just heard about how many strands you're trying to sort of pull together, but I just did want to ask whether there's any engagement specifically with the Gloucestershire and Herefordshire Canal Trust, who have got substantial funding to work on sort of opening up canals, including creating some kind of community basins, which could really be a part of our flood mitigation strategy.
I think the short answer is, we have had discussions, I think, on specific issues, with the Canal Trust, over the past period, but we haven't got any active conversations, at the moment. So we're happy to, if you want to put us in touch with.
Yeah, very specifically in Ledbury, the Gloucestershire and Herefordshire Canal Trust have £1 million to develop the canal where there's a big housing development, and there's no reason why there couldn't be a joint conversation and flood mitigation within that scheme.
Yeah, I have had a meeting with them about that. And, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
So two threads of what I want to say. The first is, I remember when I was looking at this role, when I was notionally in the role Dan's in at the moment, I was talking to a member of parliament from the east of the country who said he had to work with 31 different public bodies when looking at flooding in that area. And it became very obvious that that was just not viable, I won't say unsustainable. So frankly, you know, it's pretty tough here. There are so many bodies involved, so many very sensible additions of other bodies you could also get involved into the mix, but it does make it very, very difficult. And the second thread was, I spoke to the chief executive at the time and said, you know, we are the lead. Let's get those people in a room to thresh it out, even if, as Alyssa says, then you suddenly find through there somebody's been squirreling away on something because they aren't aware of the rest of the ecosystem. There were a couple of recommendations right at the beginning of that work that I was doing with Steve, because the real point, of course, was when I said to the chief executive, I'd like to look at flooding. He said, yeah, go speak to Steve, he runs the flood team. And I said to Steve, where's the team? And Steve said, it is me. And it was at the time just Steve. I think the team has grown a lot, and this is why I've said that we do want to do this review later on to see all the dreams, if you like, that were laid out at the beginning, how much of that has been achieved now with a grown team. So that is, how much do we convene people to make sure there's better communications, because we are the lead on that. How much can we make sure that we have proper channels for recording ideas and innovations so that it's not all just hearsay, and basically making sure that Steve can manage all of that stuff as Herefordshire, as the legal authority can do. The final bit, of course, is that there is the LUG IDB, which complicates matters all the more, an aspect that I wasn't aware of when I first said something must be done. So it is really complicated. The only way we're going to solve this complication, I think, is by putting a bit of formality around the way that we manage it. It can't just be through informal conversations.
Yeah, here. I've worked with Councillor Swinglehurst over the last 3 years, and every time I ask her to explain something, she always starts with, it's complicated. It's the first word she uses every time. I have a question for Councillor Swinglehurst. That there are a number of policies, national policies by the Environment Agency, Natural England and DEFRA, which are incompatible with the nature of land use in Herefordshire. For example, the recommendations that we should eat less red meat, and that resulted in chicken sheds springing up on the banks of our rivers all over the county. DEFRA's recommendation that farmers grow ryegrass instead of ordinary meadow grass because they'll get more grass out of it, and that killed all our skylarks and curlews. The fact that Regen Ben at Townsend Farms wants to have he's got a license to draw river water. They're a rare thing nowadays, but he's got a historic license, open-ended license. He wants to draw the river water and use it in a different way, which will use 10% of the water he's currently using. They won't let him do that because they said, well, he can cancel his existing license, but he can't get a new one. This is sort of idiocy. Now, my question is it worth this council? Is there any hope of this council challenging these national agencies on some of the issues that don't work for Herefordshire? Is there any future in taking that route?
Challenging. I just don't think that it's going to, produce a result. I am definitely challenging on the abstraction. There are a number of kind of regulatory anomalies which are different. I mean, these are very specific, historic glitches in regulation that are preventing good from happening. There are a number of them, and you try and pick them out one by one, and then go to the regulator and say, "Can we have another think about this, please?" And then they need to feed it up upstream to DEFRA and see if they can bring about that change. It's not really a political lobbying thing. It's just simply pointing out that there's an unforeseen outcome to what's become an anomalous bit of regulatory mismatch. So, I think that's what I tend to do. Is I tend to try and pick up precise issues and just work those through to get them solved, because that is doable. Getting you know, government to change direction
Do
on.
you think we're doing
big
enough
policy
already
stuff is how
in
we
that?
might want to save our breath, frankly.
We're doing enough in that direction?
I think, yeah, where there's a specific regulatory misfire, then, you know, that's something to bring to the attention of the regulator and to push them to escalate that into DEFRA and to see if we can get them to reconsider it. But obviously, you know, when the policies are national, we may have a local variation or a local phenomenon, and they say, well, we can't change the national policy because of you. But on the other hand, it might be a national misfire, in which case it's sensible that they revisit that if we could draw it to their attention.
And we have challenged, so Steve sits on a number of different panels with flooding, and where DEFRA's decisions or the EA's decisions have impacted Herefordshire and the amount of money we may receive and things like that. You know, there is robust challenge that goes back. Again, ward councillors wouldn't see it. You know, you get an update as the cabinet member, and perhaps we could be more transparent on that. Just wanted to mention one thing on Nick's point, because it's kind of been lost in the whole public realm transformation piece. But planning applications, comments from a land drainage perspective were previously with Balfour Beatty, and then now with Steve's team. So we've joined up flood risk and the comments, and I think that's an example where you would say actually it was ludicrous they were split apart in the first place. And so we've looked at it and we've tried to streamline teams into the right places.
Right, Chair, can I just, I was actually going to make another point, which is to just sort of to go back to the point that Councillor Mason's making about the magnitude of of what we're talking about here. And in fact, maybe the thing is to try to, for this committee to consider, how do you make this a small enough slice of an enormous subject that it is possible to map it and to understand the relationships. And that might be in where is the interface, where is the exact and precise interface between the local authority and public realm and the other things that we've been talking about, land use and enforcement and so on and so forth, public rights away. You know, where is that exact area and narrow that focus as much as possible, and who is in that area rather than everywhere, and then that's what you're looking at.
Yeah, but that can be a consequence. I'm going to bring in a minute, Councillor Thomas, to bring some reality to this, because I've run nearly 15 minutes over my time, which is unusual for me. And I think we won't probably have enough time to discuss fully the work programme. But as you know, committee members, I'm quite fond of informals for discussing a work programme in between committee meetings. But I did want this to continue because it's such a big subject and there is a lot to discuss. But the point I wanted to make that you've been making, Councillor Swinhouse, is if you had a risk strategy on the public realm, then those questions would come out of looking at, well, we've got a risk strategy, so how do we mitigate it? How do we manage it? How do we control it? And then you would start coming up with the complexities of how you do that. But you start with that initial step, which is what we're talking about as a committee, of having that risk strategy, even if it needs to be then developed and formed into something more detailed.
If I may, Chair, I think when you go back with that recommendation, you perhaps need to distinguish, because if you say risk and public realm together to Ed Bradford or someone similar, they will say we've got a risk strategy.
Yeah, because of the asset risk.
Yeah,
I know it's to do with land use management. I will make that connection. I understand that. As soon as you talk the risk strategy, you get the three themes, including road safety and everything else. I do understand that. Councillor Thomas. Finally, and then I'm calling a close to this.
Sustainable farming. As long as you were going to pay farmers by the ton, you were never going to have sustainable farming, unfortunately. That's a fact of life. And the other thing, just talking about Ben at Ross. He can abstract. He can abstract in the winter. He has a license to do that. He just needs to build, and like most other people, build himself a lake to house it in the winter. So he could easily do that. But I do agree that there are stupidities. He wants to do drip feed stuff with a fraction of the water. The other thing, I've never understood this fascination with carbon. Apparently, according to NASA at the moment, there are parts of the Sahara Desert becoming green, which have never, ever, well, since the Roman times, ever been green. That is because of carbon. And, you know, carbon levels 150 years ago, 3,000 years ago, much greater than they are today. And we didn't have all these countries flooded. So, have we got our facts right on that? But anyway, that's a hobby horse of mine. Anyway, thank you very much. I gotta go.
And I will have the last point as chair. We've got a public realm now. We've tarmacked most of the country. And therefore the water's got nowhere else to go. That's the problem. Anyway, thank you very much. We're going to have a short break. How long do you think we'll need, Daniel? 20 minutes perhaps?
15.
I'll say 20 just to give us scope for that. Can we pause the live stream, please? And confirmation of broadcasting. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone who's looking in, and apologies that we took longer than I had intended to agree on recommendations. But we are now going to put our recommendations onto the screen. Daniel, you'll read them out, and then we have two decisions: one, whether we want to agree them on block, and then second one to agree them per se. Okay.
Chair, I just need to go back into the meeting.
Right. If you could just share them if you can.
Yeah, just give me a moment. I just need to go back into the meeting.
All right, okay.
Nearly there, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. Do you want to read them out, Daniel?
I do, yes. So the recommendations are currently as suggested by the committee are as follows. One, that Herefordshire Council should consider ways to better signpost landowners to schemes to support engagement and education with regard to their land management responsibilities. Two, with interested partners, the executive should develop a plan for facilitating and enhancing its current work, including the promotion of innovative methods, preventative practice and carbon mitigation in land use management to reduce the risk to the public realm. Three, that the Public Rights of Way team review and amend their reporting framework so that it better reflects the processes that they follow. And four, that the executive review current enforcement practices with all relevant partners and agree a coordinated and consistent approach to enforcement to strengthen action against those with land use management responsibilities who do not comply.
Can we just go back to the second one, please? Because do we need to clarify more what we mean by existing work there? Or are people quite happy? No?
No, I don't think you do.
Nick, the third one is your recommendation.
Yeah.
Right, if you could show Councillor Mason the other two, please, Daniel. Councillor Mason, you had a chance of talking. Right. First of all, members, are you happy to vote for these on block? If so, show of hands.
Marvellous.
Second, are you happy to actually have these are our recommendations for this particular scrutiny? Thank you. Can I thank everybody for their input here? I thought it was a very useful discussion. We'll now go on to item 8, which is over to you, Councillor Prevedy, to give us a review on what's been happening with the task and finish study on bus division and whether you need us to do anything at this stage.
Thank you.
Item 8.
So on June 30th, we'll have our fourth and final review meeting before we put together our report and recommendations to this committee in September. Each meeting that we've had so far has been preceded by a planning session with officers and key lines of inquiry meetings with group members. And between these meetings, each of the group have met with various decision makers, experts, advisors, bus providers and residents. The officers have been very supportive, the group members have been engaged, and I'm very grateful to Simon for keeping us organised. In my last report, I highlighted the following findings: that delivery is constrained by operator capacity, that data and insight are critical weaknesses, that funding and subsidy pressures are rising, and that there is no money. But the current powers are changing and there are some strategic opportunities ahead. So since my last report, we've had the Bus Summit, which is a really useful forum for operators and users to come together. And we attended the Community Transport Forum, which was inspiring. We learned that community transport is so much more than moving people around. It has enormous health and social care value too. And I think all the members of the Task and Finish group would recommend that support for those providers is sustained and improved, and that community transport has better representation on the enhanced partnership and other decision-making forums. We learnt about home to school, SEND provision, and the council's acquisition of a new fleet of vehicles to provide an alternative to overpriced taxis. And our final review meeting, we'll be looking at mainstream home to school provision. We're going to take one sample school as a kind of case study, and we're also going to look at the 66 route, particularly and its usage for sort of 16 to 19-year-olds getting to college. This route receives subsidy from the council, so we can get data on it, unlike commercial routes for which the operators are not required to share anything with us, which makes our Task and Finish group quite tricky because we can't do a proper comparison of commercial routes and subsidised routes. So on this case, on the 66 subsidised route, we've also asked for information on the tender process and the contracts, so we can see what KPIs are built into that process and whether there's room for improving those through that process. Demand responsive transport is another topic for this review meeting. When I started on this bus Task and Finish group, I was absolutely convinced that DRT must be the solution to all our bus problems. I've learned since that the failure rate of DRT schemes is over 65%. The average number of passengers carried per hour is just 2, and the average cost per passenger journey is £23.55. So DRT may not be the solution. However,
well done for dreaming.
Yeah.
Well done for dreaming.
Worcestershire On Demand, which is a demand responsive transport scheme in a neighbouring county, have just hit 8,000 rides per month, which makes them one of the most used DRT services in the UK. They are rolling out their scheme, and officers are just starting a few conversations about whether that scheme can come cross border and maybe link areas like Cradley and Colwall to Malvern. So there might be scope still for looking at that.
And given that Worcestershire have got no money, they've achieved this, so there must be some scope in it.
Well, they get
something right.
They get a much bigger BSIP allocation than we do. So
where was the £27 from?
The £23.55.
£23.55.
So that was from the government funded 19 DRT schemes.
It's a national average.
Yeah.
A national average.
They did 19 pilot DRT schemes, and they've done their first phase of their evaluation, and those were the.
Because we did talk about the fact that there's a couple of dialer ride schemes that already exist in Herefordshire, aren't there?
Yeah.
Do we get prices for those?
Well, they're kind of included in our community transport providers.
Yes. Do we get a per user cost?
We did ask for that at the community transport forum, didn't we?
Yes.
And we haven't received.
Because I imagine those are really, really inexpensive.
Well, they're generally run by volunteers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they are
Very cost effective.
Yeah. But they are also limited by their capacity.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a key part of our provision, and it needs to be brought kind of closer in. There's definitely lots of scope for that. But we will chase up that figure that we asked for that at the community transport forum. We said price per cost per journey. The only trouble with that is that misses the whole point about the wider impact of community transport, which is the social benefits. If you just put a monetary cost on it, you've got to make sure that's kind of included, in the value of it. Yes, so lots of scope for that still. So now that we've all turned into bus nerds, I don't know if you feel you've turned into a bus nerd, Robert, but we're really excited about the government scheme to offer free bus travel to under 16s throughout August. But the first thing we have to make sure is that our operators are participating in the scheme, because it's not a given. Not all our bus operators participate in the £3 fare cap scheme because of the administrative burden. So Natalie's looking into that for us to find out who is participating, and if they're not participating, we need to look at ways to support them in this. And one of the things we've talked about as a possible recommendation is a financial buffer that the council holds so that small operators don't have to bear the cost of free fares and then claim it back from DfT, that there might be something that just kind of tides them over if that's their issue.
This claiming back model that it covers a lot of areas is a constant problem, actually. Yeah.
And the admin involved in it. So we're looking at ways to support them in that, and we also want to make sure that we absolutely make the most of this scheme and this opportunity to collect data, feedback, monitor compliance, understand whether these free bus journeys are replacing car journeys. All that data is absolutely crucial to us kind of improving our chance of receiving funding. And we're also going to be looking at franchising and the development of the pilot project that was passed in full council for extending the 16 to 19 bus pass to evenings and weekends. So there's loads in that last review meeting. So we've covered a lot and we've learnt a lot. Particularly, I feel we've grown our knowledge about the fact that there is no money, but there is competence, expertise and ambition amongst the council officers. Some good operators, some not so good operators, but no budget to support it really. So we may need to focus all our recommendations on one simple aim, which is supporting officers to be able to tick the boxes that they need to tick in order to increase our BSIP funding, which is the Bus Service Improvement Plan allocation from the Department for Transport.
I think that must be our main target.
We receive the basic BSIP funding, and other local transport authorities receive 10 times as much as we do. So it could be that these recommendations are really, really low cost measures that contribute to our chances to getting a bigger slice of the cake. And they include collecting good data. We have to show a commitment to sustainable travel, and we can do that in really simple ways, like just updating our passenger charter, which is sitting on our website and hasn't been updated since 2022. Training drivers to provide safe spaces. Decarbonising our fleet is quite an important one. That's obviously something we have to work with the operators to do. Improving.
How do we know how viable that is? Because it all sounds like a lovely idea, but all of the fleet, as we know, is full of very old, rusty.
No, there's not. Some of them have got some very modern vehicles. That's not fair.
Yeah, but some of our bus operators are never going to have the.
You said good and bad bus operators.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
And sometimes it's what their resources are. If they're bigger and they have more funds and more staff and.
The reason I ask is because one of the ways to solve that problem is if we provide a fleet.
Yep. Okay, and that's part.
That's why I was asking the question. It wasn't just So the providers at the moment have got that in many cases rolling stock or whatever we call it, which they are still depreciating out. If we were in a situation where we were expecting them to move to more sustainable or electric or whatever it might be, that's quite a big exercise for them to go through.
Yeah.
If it were a completely different model where essentially we were saying, here are the vehicles, you can lease them from us, that changes everything. So that's why I was curious as to whether
in some ways,
part of what we're exploring.
That's kind of started happening because, of course, the Zipper scheme, electric buses, is now no longer going to be run by Hereford Council. It's hopefully going to be picked up by a commercial operator, and they're going to be leasing the electric vehicles from Hereford City Council. Is that what was agreed?
Yes.
Oh no, sorry, Elizabeth. Oh yeah, are you on City Council?
As
Yeah.
well. Yeah, sorry, do you want to?
No, you go. No.
But no, that's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
we're moving to working with leasing them to an operator
Yeah.
rather than being the operator
Yeah.
ourselves.
But,
So
again, we have no money
Herefordshire Council could do the same. Well, we do have money.
for buying electric buses. Maybe if we
Have you
took
any
that
idea
from
how
the road
expensive
building
they are?
scheme.
Very expensive.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, something to
capitalize it,
discuss
it's fine.
at the next
Capitalize it, it's
review
easy.
meeting.
Well, there's a money
Um,
capital.
But yeah, one of the other things that we need to do to increase our BSIP allocation is to show ambition. So I think things like pilot schemes, which are lower cost, but just firstly, they help us collect the data, but also they show that we have the ambition to roll these out. So our next steps are our final review meeting in a few weeks, a last meeting of the group to consider our report and recommendations. Then I'll share it informally with some of the key decision makers. I just think it's really good to have Philip Price on board, you know, if we want him to accept our recommendations, that kind of thing. And then we'll tweak them, approve them with the whole group, and then share our report and recommendations. September. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very
Can I
much.
ask a question? Park and ride?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm just throwing it at you to see what you say.
And you said we haven't got any money, and they
Well, we have park and choose sites,
Yeah.
you know, that we're not properly using.
Yes.
And it could be that a DRT scheme that then kind of provides those kind of shuttles, you know, from park and choose sites. There's still so much work to do, but we did decide that really we need to stick to this timescale. And the principal reason for doing that is because everything's changing in a really positive way. And I've noticed from reading the Enhanced Partnership minutes that officers are actually starting to enact some of the things we've talked about and discussed. So I kind of want to get the recommendations in. Otherwise, whatever we're recommending,
becomes already done.
they've already done.
It's an affirmation that they've done the right thing.
Yeah,
It's not really scrutiny.
We've got to have a cut-off of when this meeting ends, and there's so much more than just what we've covered.
You're right.
Okay.
And I'd like to say you've done a great job of chairing this group.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's been a complicated subject.
And thanks very much, Justine, for that comprehensive review of where you are on the task and finish study group. Just one point, remember about the rurality of Hertfordshire that I mentioned in terms of land use management. That applies to bus provision as well, of course. So somewhere in there, whatever you put in the background, I think in order to explain why you maybe haven't been as radical as you would like to be, it may be the nature of the county and the fact we are quite a depopulated county.
That's right. And I mean,
and that needs to be said.
Yeah.
So that if anyone's looking at the BSIP ambitions, we could say, well, we're being ambitious, but it's within the context of a rural county.
But actually,
We've got so much money because of the current government, first of all, taking away our own grant, and then secondly, removing rurality from the algorithm and choosing how they pay us. So the result of those two things alone cost us £25 million or something like that.
And that hits bus service.
And that hits what we're able to help with.
Yeah, but rurality is still part of the algorithm for rurality for BSIP allocation, but it's also population. And so the transport authorities that score really highly and get the big BSIP allocation, they've got urban areas, so they're highly populated, but they've got a lot of rural areas as well.
But they could probably offset one against the other, and that's something we're not. Okay, well, thank you very much. Moving finally on to our work programme, we only have 12 minutes. Just a couple of points on that. First of all, Councillor Mason, we are going to be looking at hopefully a set of TORs for the Spotlight Review for September. Remember, we really do need them because we've got to decide, are we going to have a Spotlight Review or not instead of a March meeting?
Yes.
So that's quite important that you set out quite clearly why you feel we need to do that and with any objectives within those TORs. So that is a deadline for you. So Clark, you'll need those TORs by when?
11th September.
Yes. So
Yeah, 11th.
Yes, it's an auspicious date.
Okay. The second one I want to cover is the carbon management plan, which I mentioned today, which we're looking at in November.
The council one or the county one?
It's a council one, but I will go on to the council.
Can we be very clear which one we're talking about?
No, well, yes and no. On the council carbon management plan, which is coming to us, I think we've got a couple of areas we need to look at in terms of objectives. One is actually to test whether the carbon management plan is going to achieve the net zero ambitions that the council says it's going to achieve by 2030. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's a challenge, as you would want to challenge Councillor Highfield, about whether they could actually go further and achieve a net negative carbon position by 2030. So that's another area I want to test, because that's one of the things you said about climate change.
Definition, net zero is the problem.
Yeah.
With that. It as a national target, it's ridiculous, and I'm disappointed that it doesn't seem that anybody in government understands that. It guarantees that 2050, 1st of January, if we succeed, will be the point at which humanity exerts the maximum warming pressure on the environment. And they don't seem to grasp that fact. How it translates into an individual industry or a council is a little different. If we are not adding to by 2030, we're not adding to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're certainly not reducing what's in the county area, but we're no longer adding to it. It is slightly less of a misstated target, but it's still not accurate. It's still not an accurate target for us. And so I would like us to review the definition we're working towards.
Well, we can work through that, what that objective means, but I do want to capture that point that you've always said that we need to be in a negative position, not just a neutral position. Otherwise, climate change
needs to capture carbon. It is no point heading to a point where we maximise the effect, because we already know we're influencing the climate or the global temperatures too much today, and we're going to be influencing it a great deal more by 2050. And given that it takes centuries for CO2 to leave the atmosphere naturally, we're going to go on influencing it indefinitely with the current targets. So the only solution to this is carbon capture, and therefore we should be pushing, where we have very little influence on this, but we should be pushing this.
Okay, so the first area I want to do is to test the actual outcome of the plan and whether it's going to achieve it. The second one, if you prefer, we could talk about carbon capture per se, because that would lead to a negative position, and what the council is doing on that.
We're already doing it, but actually there are.
I mean, there's trading platform there. We could plant trees for everyone else and all that. So carbon capture will be another area as an objective. And the third one is what's happening across the county. I really don't think we can ignore that, Councillor Highfield.
No, we absolutely, we can't ignore it. I just want to make sure that when we talk about a carbon net zero plan, we're talking about the council one, which we have control over because it's our assets, and the county one, which we don't have any control over, but we can influence, just like land management. We can influence it and try and set good practice, but we can't, we've got no mandatory authority to do anything.
But what I'm going to suggest, rather than calling it the carbon management plan, because that's part of the evidence, Daniel, as the council's carbon management plan, I'm going to call the topic carbon management in the county.
Well, when do you intend to look at this? In September?
No, this is November.
November.
It's November. Carbon management in the county, and one part of that will be the carbon management plan for the
overarching carbon management
plan, and then
council and
county.
Okay.
And also that point about carbon capture, because we, rurality again, Council President, we are in a position to capture loads of carbon.
We are capturing carbon.
And we are capturing it, and we could do more. So it's those three areas, Daniel, and the evidence will be obviously the carbon management plan for the council, any evidence we've got on the county-wide plan. I don't know where they'll be in that. There is a county-wide plan, isn't there? On net zero, isn't it?
Yes, we have a plan, but it is all about influence and encouraging engagement as those things.
Attendees?
Leaving horses to water.
Attendees?
Well, Alyssa needs to report.
Alyssa?
She's taken.
She has a standard invite. It would have to be Richard Vaughan. We'd want him there.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Daniel.
Yeah.
On the bus side, are you going to be setting out the attendees you want for your report to be there from the officer side or not?
Oh, I don't know. What should I do?
Well, you present the report to the committee, right?
Yeah,
So you don't have to have any officers in support if you don't need them. It's up to you if you wanted them to add anything you want.
what do you recommend?
Well, I don't think we need any officers to engage with if the report is comprehensive and has done all that engagement.
And it's a final report,
And
so I
it's a
don't
final report,
really
so
want.
so we don't need any officers on that side. Okay, that's fine. On the carbon management side, do we want any externals? We want any external experts?
If we can find somebody, I'd like somebody who's a, not counsel, somebody who's an expert in the field to come and give us a bit of a briefing and answer questions that we might have, if that's possible. I could do a bit of research, see if there's somebody in range that we might be able to invite to.
So we have an informal beforehand, a briefing before.
Yes.
We do that in SMB all the time.
Yeah.
Briefings.
I mean,
if you could arrange that, then that would inform us.
Yes.
And we wouldn't necessarily need anyone there then, apart from officers.
Yes.
Because we'd have that information beforehand.
Because we've got a team in the council working on this, so if we have somebody else who's outside to make a few comments, that would be good.
Okay. So no attendees apart from the committee and the bus review. And that's September. Sorry, we're jumping about a bit. On November, we've got those 3 areas we want to explore under carbon management, and part of the evidence will be the carbon management plan.
Yeah,
I think we need to work through. Expand the 3 objectives a bit, but you've got an idea now.
Yeah,
the areas that we want to
let's have a chat about that.
A chat about that. Finally, of course, I mean, Councillor Mason's doing the bit on the spotlight review and flooding. Finally, the rail strategy. It's going to include the rail link. Of course it is.
What rail link?
My rail link.
I am teasing you there, Louis.
You can't ignore the motion that's been agreed by the council.
Sorry, Louis, I was literally.
I mean, I know not everybody is supporting it, but the fact is, if you're going to be scrutinising a rail strategy, then we're going to be not just looking at what they can do with the existing network. So the 2 areas we want to cover is the existing network, enhancements planned for the existing network, because I know that Ledbury have got real concerns about doubling the line, about access to the station. We've got the idea of a new station up for trialists and that. But then the other area is developing new rail links, and that will be around Hereford, Ross and Gloucester. And to be fair, there is interest outside the county on this.
I think painting a vision about what might be, it's absolutely the right way to go. I don't like people saying, "Oh, it's too expensive, forget it." Let's see what might conceivably be possible, and then
look at how can we achieve it. Yes.
Yeah.
And part of the evidence then on that will be the feasibility study, if we've got even anywhere near that by then. Or we may be criticising the committee they've not done the feasibility study. I mean, I think as a scrutiny committee, we've got every right to take a motion from the council and actually use it as part of our scrutiny of the rail strategy. Attendees, well, obviously Councillor Price. Who on the officers side? Dr. David Land?
David Land, Roger Allenby, Fionn Hall.
Okay, well, you could put them in a moment. It's just we're sketching out November, just so that we've got a bit more meat on which to work. And then what we will do before we finish, Daniel and Simon, is if we can sort of revise the work programme along what we've just discussed.
Yes.
If we can have an informal on the basis of that draft.
Yes.
When people can manage it.
Okay,
Probably when, early September?
Okay, we'll set something up for you. I think no sooner rather than later, if you don't mind.
Well, if you don't mind, because
so that we can
hold it.
Just so we can give officers.
July.
So yeah, so let's do that.
Not in August either, so.
But Simon, we will be having a planning meeting on September.
Yes, we will be.
Although we've already had a discussion with John Hobbs on that, and he's agreed the objectives. Yeah. So do we need another planning meeting on that?
I think it'd be useful for, well, you have your quarterly strategic meetings anyway with John, but I think it'd be useful just for the committee to spend a little bit more time, it's been a little rushed, just to think this through a little bit more. Simon and I can, I'll have a conversation with Fionn and other officers about what will be ready and when, just so that
Or if you can for us.
we can get some clarity on that. So leave that with us and we'll book something in and then we'll bring some more material.
Yeah, because it might not be an in-depth meeting, because we've already got the objectives agreed. But it might be trying to tease out exactly what evidence we're going to get in terms of supporting that evidence. But the corporate director's already agreed it, so.
Indeed.
So we don't have to go back over that again.
On time, Chair, as well.
Yes. And finally, the date of the next meeting is Monday, the 21st of September. And all that I've left to do is to say at 12:59, I close this meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Well, Chair.
Clean switch off. Land use management was